Hey guys, tonight we slip into the smoky, crackling world of Viking life. Not the action movie version with glistening axes and dramatic war cries, but the slow, gritty, oddly cozy reality of the everyday Norse folk. You step into a longhouse just as twilight leaks in through the doorframe, your woolen cloak damp from mist and your boots muddy from the walk through the fjordside path. Inside, the air is thick with wood smoke, sweat, and stew that's been simmering for about a century, judging by the smell. The fire pit in the middle of the room flickers shadows onto the curved timber walls, and you hear someone cursing softly as they stoke it with a pine log that stubbornly refuses to catch. A huddle of goats in the corner eyes you with judgment, and somewhere near your elbow, a toddler is enthusiastically gnawing on a carved spoon. Welcome home. Now, you might be expecting an epic horn-helmeted warrior leaping out of the shadows, but sorry to disappoint those iconic horns, total myth. You're more likely to bump into someone with a sensible wool cap and a very questionable beard than a warlord, but don't worry, you'll still probably get lice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know which fjords I'm lulling to sleep tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floor beneath you is dirt tamped down by generations of footsteps and the occasional livestock contribution. You shuffle along in stiff leather shoes, ducking slightly beneath the wooden crossbeams overhead. Everything smells like firewool and wet dog, but in a strangely comforting way, like a cabin that's forgotten it's supposed to be outside. In the center of the longhouse, the hearth glows the true heart of Viking domestic life. Above it, iron pots swing from hooks bubbling with what might be stew, or might be yesterday's porridge with new meat thrown in. Hard to tell, and frankly, no one's asking. You sit on a low bench covered in animal skins, right between a snoring uncle and a sack of onions. Warmth slowly seeps into your chilled fingers. A girl walks by with a bundle of dried herbs, tossing some into the pot and the rest onto a shelf to dry. She looks about 13, wears a dress made from rough-spun linen, and has a streak of ash across one cheek. Everyone here works, yes, even you. You'll be mucking goat stalls come dawn unless you'd rather try your hand at carding wool. It's easy to imagine Vikings as always on the move, raiding, sailing, fighting. But here the rhythm is slow, deliberate, even sleepy. The chores are constant and low-key exhausting. Milking, weaving, salting fish, chopping firewood, and occasionally yelling at chickens. It's less epic saga and more manual labor, the home edition. You lean back and take in the structure around you. Viking longhouses are built with timber frames and walls packed with wattle and daub, a delightful mix of mud, straw, and animal dung. The roof is steeply pitched to shed snow, and the whole place feels like a ship turned upside down and filled with hay. It's drafty in a way that no amount of fur can quite fix. But it's not just the architecture that wraps around you like a second skin, it's the sounds. The creak of wood, the cluck of hens, the distant howl of wind outside the thatch. Someone strums a lyre badly in the corner. You'd ask them to stop, but that's also the person who sharpens your knives. You decide to let it slide. One of the elders starts telling a story, his voice low and gravelly. It's a saga about a warrior who fought a sea serpent and survived by somehow charming it with song. The kids listen with wide eyes. You listen with half a brain cell. The other half is already dozing. Here's your first little fact nugget for the night. Viking longhouses didn't have chimneys, that's right. All that smoke, It just kind of wafted around, found its way out through roof gaps, and left your lungs feeling like a peat bog. On the bright side, it helped preserve the wood beams by keeping bugs away. On the not so bright side, good luck seeing anything after dark. And a quirky tidbit to chew on Viking dwellings were sometimes insulated with moss and seaweed. Yes, seaweed. Slapped into the walls like nature's fiberglass. It's surprisingly effective and smells only mildly horrifying when wet. But the Longhouse wasn't just a home, it was a stage, a social center, a place where deals were made, marriages arranged, and meals debated. And not always calmly. Historians still argue whether the Longhouse was entirely communal, or whether some families had partitioned areas with a whisper of privacy. Honestly, with a dozen people, three goats, and a rotating cast of loud relatives crammed into one room, privacy is more of a theory than a practice. You wander to the far end of the house where the family's status symbols are displayed. A polished shield, some imported glass beads, and a prized bronze key hanging from a hook. That key doesn't open a door. It symbolizes the woman's control of the household, her authority in managing food cloth, and all the daily logistics of not freezing to death. No small feat considering the weather here often forgets it's spring. Speaking of the cold, your cloak is still damp and your toes are dangerously close to becoming Viking popsicles. You inch closer to the hearth where an old woman is drying strips of fish on a rack suspended above the fire. She grunts half a greeting and hands you a piece of dried cod. You chew it slowly. It tastes like salted leather, but at least it's chewy. That's something. There's a sort of quiet dignity in all this survival by routine, by doing small things over and over until they matter. You mend nets not because it's thrilling, but because you like to eat. You rub fat into your boots because frostbite is not a great look. And when someone sneezes, well, you bless them with their frisk not out of politeness, but because the last cold took 3 villagers and the goat. As you lean back into the glow of the fire, the longhouse sighs around you, a wooden belly breathing in and out. Outside, the wind hisses through the thatch, and inside the flames dance like shadows, remembering stories. You're warm finally, full of strange fish and stranger tales, and somehow you're starting to feel at home. You wake to the earthy perfume of moss and smoke, your face warm from the hearth's embers, but your back stubbornly cold from the ever-damp floor. Outside, dawn isn't so much a burst of light as a slow gray smear across the sky. You're greeted by the sound of sheep screaming in the distance, a rooster that clearly doesn't understand time, and someone outside arguing loudly with a barrel. Your joints creak as you rise. Congratulations, you survived a Viking night in a longhouse. Barely. As you shuffle toward the fire for warmth, you spot someone tugging on thick, scratchy wool trousers with the resigned face of a person who knows they'll be covered in mud within 5 minutes anyway. Another is knotting their hair back with a leather thong. There's no mirror, just a polished metal disc that gives back a warped funhouse version of your sleepy face. You're not looking your best, but here alive is really the gold standard. And here's the first thing we've got to get straight. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. We've all seen the movie versions, majestic warriors bounding into battle with swooping cow horns on their heads like fashion-forward rams. But those horns? Total nonsense. No archaeological evidence. None. Zilch. It was a 19th century opera costume thing. Blame Wagner. Real Viking helmets, when they could afford them, were like iron-rounded and brace yourself shockingly practical. Most Norse folk couldn't even afford helmets. You, for instance, are making do with a woolen cap, lined with rabbit fur. Its damp smells faintly of fish oil, and yet you love it more than your own relatives. Why? Because it's the only thing keeping your ears from freezing off. You pull it down over your eyebrows and brave the chilly morning. You step outside and are immediately slapped in the face by wind, so sharp it feels personal. Your breath puffs out in clouds. The longhouse from the outside looks like a buried ship, long curved low to the ground. Smoke curls from a gap in the roof, making its way into the pale sky. Around you, other longhouses huddle like squatting bears' windows, small slits that don't do much for lighting or warmth. A teenage boy clomps by wearing boots made of stitched together sealskin. He waves, grins, and shows you a helmet he made himself out of boiled leather and layered bark. For practice, he says proudly, "It looks like an upside down bucket, but hey, creativity thrives in cold climates." You follow him to the edge of the village where a group of men are inspecting weapons and gear. No one here is dressed like the cliche Viking warrior poster. Tunics or rough spun cloaks are woolen and thick, and many wear layers of linen that have been patched more times than you can count. And under it all, yes, trousers, not skirts. Linen or wool breeches often tied at the ankle, sometimes stuffed into boots. You hear someone mutter about the good old summer when the mud only went up to your knees. Here's your mainstream history fact. The only confirmed Viking helmet with a preserved metal cap, eye guard, and nose guard was found in Gjørmundbu, Norway. It had 0 horns, functional, formidable, and not at all theatrical. The horns we imagine a Victorian fantasy cooked up to add spice to museum exhibits and stage plays. Vikings didn't need flair, they needed frostbite protection. But now for the quirky twist, while helmets weren't horned, some ceremonial hats may have been. There's evidence that Bronze Age headgear with horns existed centuries earlier, possibly for religious rituals. So maybe some early shaman somewhere wore antlers to commune with a very confused moose god. But the average Viking, he was busy sharpening an axe and hoping not to trip in the mud. You're invited to try on a helmet, not metal of course, but wood, layered with leather and shaped like a dome. It's heavier than it looks, pinches your ears, and smells deeply of old sweat and pine resin. But it gives you an odd sense of safety. Also a small headache. There's a debate happening nearby. 2 men are arguing over whether to reinforce their shields with iron or stick to rawhide and wood. You catch the words weight balance and Thor's eyebrows, which you decide not to follow up on. This leads into another historical debate. Historians still argue whether all Viking warriors wore helmets at all. Some suggest they were a luxury reserved for elites, while the average farmer turned fighter went into battle with a shield, an axe, and a prayer. You head back toward the center of the village where women are busy layering wool cloaks over tunics, tying belts made from woven bands, and slipping knives into sheaths that hang from their hips. Everyone carries something sharp, not because they're spoiling for a fight, but because it's a basic survival tool. You pull your own knife from your belt, a little rusted, slightly dull, but yours. You're one of them now. Sort of. Someone gestures for you to join in helping move firewood. You do after a short negotiation with your own laziness. Your fingers go numb. You start to miss central heating and coffee. But there's something about the way the village breathes and groans together that makes it all feel right? Like you're part of a machine made from wood and smoke and cold breath. A child runs by wrapped in a shaggy sheep's pelt that makes them look like a moving rug. You help them fix their cloak pin, a brooch made of twisted bronze shaped like a serpent. Jewelry, even modest, matters here. It's more than decoration, it tells stories. Family ties travels wealth. You wonder what your plain wool tunic says. Probably, "Hi, I'm new and I smell like peat." As the sun creeps higher, you notice more people filing toward the fjord. A ship is being prepared not for raiding not today, but for trade. Cargo nets are spread out and barrels of smoked fish are loaded on. The crew wears thick gloves and oil-slicked hoods. Someone jokes about sailing into a sea serpent's stomach, and no one laughs too hard, just in case. You retreat for a moment to the hill above the village, looking down at the timber roofs, the curling smoke, and the tiny, resilient people swarming like frost-covered ants. The wind cuts across your cheeks and you pull your cap tighter. This world is beautiful in its bleakness. There's a rhythm here that feels like a song if the song were mostly in a minor key and sung by tired people with frozen toes. Before heading back in, you spot something scrawled in the snow with a stick. A smiley face with horns. Some kid's joke, maybe. A small rebellion against the dullness of reality. You smile too. It's the only horned helmet you'll see today, and it's just snow. Your fingers are still tingling as you trudge through slush toward the sounds of clinking scraping and the occasional creative curse word drifting from the blacksmith's hut. There's no mistaking the smell-scorched iron charcoal and the metallic tang of sweat mixed with old leather. You step inside and are immediately hit by a wall of heat. The forge blazes in the corner like someone has trapped a very angry sun in a pile of rocks. The blacksmith, a burly man with forearms like tree trunks, and an expression that suggests he hasn't smiled since the last feast day, nods at you. His apprentice, a lanky teen with soot on his nose, and a slight fear of hammers, scurries by with a pile of horseshoes. The anvil rings out as the blacksmith slams a red-hot blade into shape sparks, flying like angry bees. Here's something you probably didn't expect. Viking villages weren't all war prep and wild feasts. A huge part of daily life revolved around making things and making them well. The blacksmith wasn't just a guy who hammered swords for glory-hungry warriors. He made nails, hinges, tools, cooking gear, and yes, the occasional axe. The kind used for chopping wood more often than limbs. The forge is a sort of sacred space, hot, loud, and a little bit magical. In fact, Norse mythology is full of dwarves crafting enchanted items in underground forges. That connection to metalwork wasn't just poetic, it was practical. Metal was rare and expensive. You didn't waste it. Old blades were reforged, nails were prized, and even broken bits were melted down for reuse. The idea of disposable anything laughable. You fix, repurpose, and sometimes name your tools. It's like minimalism, but enforced by harsh survival. Now here's your official historical nugget. Viking blacksmiths used bloomeries to extract usable iron from ore, a process involving lots of charcoal bellows and patience. It wasn't glamorous. It was sweaty, smoky, and possibly lung-shortening. But it worked. Most Viking tools and weapons were made of this bloomery iron, which wasn't the purest, but it got the job done. Especially if the job was make a spade so I can dig through this frozen nightmare of a garden. Your fringe fact for this section. Some Norse folk believed their best blacksmiths were descended from the gods, or at least watched over by them. Smithing had a semi-sacred status. It's one of the few jobs where people might quietly look the other way when you mutter to your tools like they're your friends. Which, let's be honest, they kind of are. As you watch, the apprentice brings out a worn horseshoe. The blacksmith nods and they start the process of reshaping it. You offer to help and are handed the bellows. It's your job to pump oxygen into the fire. This looks easy until you try. After a few pulls, your arms burn and you feel like the world's most underpaid gym member. The blacksmith grunts approvingly. That's the closest you're getting to a compliment today. Behind you, shelves are stacked with hammers, tongs, chisels, punches, and files. Each one has its place. Each one is clean oiled and ready. You're starting to get the sense that blacksmiths might be the earliest form of obsessive DIY YouTubers. If they had ring lights and camera mounts, they'd probably be doing tutorials on how to forge your own lockpicks from scrap nails. But blacksmithing wasn't the only craft making Viking society tick. A few steps away past the goat pen and under a low awning, a woman is hunched over a loom the size of a bed frame. She's weaving, carefully, rhythmically. Her fingers dart like fish through water, pulling the thread, tightening it, adjusting. You sit beside her and she hands you a spindle. Welcome to Viking textile life, where clothing doesn't come from shops, it comes from sheep. Or flax. Or nettles. That's right. Vikings made fabric from nettles. Because they were metal like that. The fibers were softened and spun into surprisingly comfortable thread. In summer, nettle cloth was light and breathable. In winter, it was layered under wool. And if nothing else, it gave you bragging rights. What are you wearing? Oh, just some wild stinging plants I beat into submission. You try spinning the wool. The spindle wobbles like a nervous duck. The woman chuckles and takes it back. Clearly, you're not quite ready for Viking Etsy just yet. Historians still argue whether the majority of Viking women stayed home doing domestic work or also joined raids and trades. What's agreed on, though, is that textile work was a massive part of life. Clothing wasn't just function, it was wealth, identity, and power. A beautifully woven cloak could earn you respect or even secure a marriage alliance. And spinning was so important that the Norns, the mythic fate weavers, spun the threads of human life. So next time you fumble threading a needle, just remember you might be insulting cosmic destiny. Outside, a boy carves wood into spoons. His mother is scrubbing a metal pot with sand. A pair of old men argue over how many spearheads fit in a single trade chest. Everything here is built by hand, often slowly, always with care. Viking life wasn't just swinging swords and shouting Valhalla. It was craft patience and constant maintenance. And yet, even with all that industry, it's not quiet. Chickens cluck, metal pings, someone's toddler screams because they were told not to lick an axe head. You know the usual. By late afternoon, the sky begins to droop with the weight of impending sleet. You help cover the forge with a hide tarp. Gather the tools into their storage chest and get one last nod from the blacksmith. Maybe admiration, maybe relief that you didn't burn down his livelihood. As you walk back toward the longhouse, your hands are sore. Your cloak smells like smoke, and you've got a splinter in your thumb from the spindle. But something in you settles. There's comfort in knowing that here every object around you, every nail, every shoe, every spoon, was made with real sweat and real care. No batteries, no factories, no QR codes, just effort, repetition, pride. You're not just learning Viking history, you're living it one smoky, blistered finger at a time. By now, you've accepted that your cloak is permanently damp and your boots will never fully dry. That's just the emotional tax of being a Viking. You're learning to live with it. As you head out early again, you catch the glint of morning sun on something shiny. It's not a sword or a shield, it's fish scales. Dozens of them. Slippery, smelly, iridescent, and plastered to everything from baskets to beards. Welcome to the dockside. This morning your task is less about fire and forge and more about slime and seaweed. Because here's something that rarely gets attention in dramatic Viking reenactments. Most Vikings spent way more time fishing than fighting. Romantic, isn't it? Nothing says legendary Norse hero like guy with a cod. You're ushered down to the water's edge where long, lean boats rock in their moorings. Some are rowboats, others are seagoing vessels. You expected the iconic dragon-head longships, but today's fleet is more practical. No figureheads, no fancy carvings. Just solid planks, tar-sealed seams, and a smell of salt and old bait that could knock out a walrus. You climb aboard a fishing vessel, really just a large wooden canoe with dreams of grandeur, and immediately step in something wet and unpleasant. Possibly sea cucumber, possibly worse. A boy bails water with a wooden scoop shaped from a hollowed gourd, and you're handed a net. It's rough, scratchy, and smells like it's had a long and emotional life. As you push off from the shore with a few villagers, the boat glides out into deeper water. Your arms burn from rowing. You're trying not to think about the fact that you can't swim. Then again, most Vikings couldn't. They considered the sea a hostile god, you occasionally bribed with boats full of fish. Now for your core historical tidbit, fish was a major food source for coastal Viking communities. Archaeological digs have turned up tons, literally tons of fish bones in settlement sites, especially in northern Norway and Iceland. Cod, herring, eel, salmon. If it swam and wasn't terrifying, they probably ate it. The sea was both pantry and post office highway and hazard. It wasn't just about feeding the family. Vikings traded fish. Salted, dried, or smoked it became cargo sometimes packed into long journeys. Stockfish, in particular wind-dried cod, became a kind of Nordic superfood. It could last years. Chewing it was like gnawing on a salted shoe, but hey, protein's protein. Your net dips into the water, you help drag it back slowly. The boat tips dangerously to one side, someone yells not that way, and you catch a truly unimpressed-looking flounder. Success, but fishing wasn't all trawling and net pulling. Some men use lines with hand-carved bone hooks. Others use spears and shallows, standing in freezing surf with more guts than sense. You even hear rumors of Viking ice fishing, chiseling holes in frozen lakes, and sitting patiently for hours while your face froze off and your soul reconsidered its life choices. For your fringe fact, Vikings occasionally used cormorants to help fish yes-trained birds. There's limited evidence, mostly from outside Scandinavia, but stories persist of birds diving for fish and returning to their handlers. If true, it would make Vikings the world's weirdest early bird trainers centuries before falconry got all the credit. You finally haul in something respectable, a large wriggling cod, and are rewarded with a cold pat on the back and a piece of smoked herring for breakfast. It's chewy, fishy, possibly older than you, but it hits the spot. Especially when you realize it's the warmest thing you'll eat today. Back on land, the catch is cleaned with bone knives and gut hooks. It's smelly work. Children chase each other with discarded fish heads while adults gut and fillet with mechanical focus. The heads are dried for broth, the skins used for leather, the bones sometimes ground into powder for fertilizer or animal feed. Waste nothing, ever. You're handed a knife. Time to learn. You make a mess of your first fillet, earning a slow headshake from an old woman who could probably clean a shark with her eyes closed. Your second attempt is better. By the third, your hands move a little more, like there's quick, careful practiced. Here's where historians start to debate. Some argue fishing was a specialized trade, while others believe nearly every coastal family fished out of necessity. There's no full agreement, especially since fish bones don't exactly come with name tags. But given how often seafood appears in Norse menus and trade routes, you can assume that being good with a net could make or break a household's survival. You help carry baskets of cleaned fish to a smokehouse, a low log-walled hut with racks hung from the ceiling. Inside, a smoldering fire pumps out acrid smoke that stings your eyes and coats your throat. You hang the fish by their gills, wipe your eyes, and retreat quickly. The process can take days, but when it's done, the fish will be preserved portable and nearly indestructible. Outside, someone is boiling seaweed for soup. You try not to ask questions. Then someone points to the horizon. A sail. Long and distant, barely a sliver. You squint. It could be another fishing boat, or it could be a merchant ship returning from abroad. Or raiders. The village watches silently for a beat too long. Then someone shrugs and goes back to gutting a trout. That's Viking life danger and chores all in the same breath. As the sun dips, you sit on a log, cold and covered in fish scales, eating barley porridge with a hunk of dried cod. It's not glamorous, it's not a feast, but it's hearty and surprisingly kind of comforting. The air smells like salt and smoke. Your boots are soaked. Your hands ache. And yet, as a pair of boys paddle past on a barrel, they've convinced themselves as a boat you find yourself smiling. Vikings didn't live every day like it was a legend. They lived most days like this dirty practical full of small wins and constant work. And honestly, that makes it all feel more real. You wake up to the distant sound of a horn echoing over the frost-tipped fields. It's not an emergency, it's breakfast. Kind of. It's more like a communal announcement that the barley mush is ready and you should drag yourself to the fire before it congeals into something resembling old plaster. Today you're staying closer to the heart of the settlement, the Longhouse. Now you've seen the romanticized versions. Massive halls with flickering torchlight, gleaming swords hanging from rafters, and bearded men shouting over roast boar. The truth, still impressive, but a bit more crowded, a lot more smoky, and somehow even louder. This one, for example, is home to about 20 people, 3 dogs, 1 cranky goat, and at least 1 child who insists on singing the same chant over and over like a Norse remix of Baby Shark. The longhouse is a wooden rectangle, thick-walled and turf-insulated, built to withstand weather that would make your eyelashes freeze. There's a central hearth running the length of the room, smoke curling lazily toward vents in the thatched roof, or at least that's the idea. In practice, you cough a lot and smell like burnt mutton by lunch. Here's your historical anchor for the day. The Viking longhouse was the core of rural domestic life, especially in Scandinavia before the urban expansion of the late Viking Age. It was multifunctional kitchen bedroom, barn, social hub, and storm bunker all rolled into one drafty log cabin. You're invited to help with the fire, which involves more than throwing logs on a flame. The fire has to be banked just right to keep the heat steady and the smoke manageable. You prod it with a stick and immediately get ash in your face. Everyone pretends not to notice. It's fine. You're learning. As people gather for the morning meal, you notice how space is divided. Sleeping areas are tucked along the sides, straw-stuffed mattresses, shared between couples' siblings or whoever drew the short straw. The wealthier families might get partitions, wooden screens, or thick curtains, but privacy is more of a concept than a reality. At the far end, a large wooden chair faces the hearth. It's not a throne, but it's clearly the chair. Reserved for the head of the household, it's high-backed, carved, and comfortably creaky. That person, usually a patriarch or matriarch, acts as judge, boss, and emotional thermostat. If they're having a bad day, everyone else quietly prays to Thor. You settle near a young woman mixing flour and water on a flat stone. She's making bread, or the Viking version, which is somewhere between a cracker and a weapon. It's dense, dark, and cooked directly on the hearthstone. You offer to help and immediately drop half the dough into the fire. She laughs, flicks it out with a stick, and calmly feeds it to the goat. First one's always for the gods, she says. You're not sure if she's serious. The meal is simple bread, fish, maybe a bit of dried fruit if someone got lucky at the last market. You chew slowly not because you're savoring it, but because it takes real effort to break down Viking bread. It's like flossing with your jaw muscles. Here's your quirky fact. Vikings sometimes added ground up bone to their bread, not as a secret protein boost, but because they used stone querns to grind their flour. Over time, the grit from the stones ended up in the flour and vla bread that doubled as dental sandpaper. If you make it to middle age with your teeth intact, you're either very lucky or very rich. Now about chores. Longhouse life means constant upkeep. You're assigned sweeping duty. Sounds easy. It is not. The broom is a bundle of stiff twigs tied with gut string, and it mostly just relocates dirt from one corner to another. Still, it's better than mucking out the goat pen. Children help too, usually under protest. A girl about 6 is tasked with chasing chickens out of the sleeping area. She does so with the gleeful determination of someone auditioning for a poultry rodeo. It's chaos, but it's functioning chaos. And historians still debate how strictly roles were divided inside these households. Did women run the domestic sphere while men focused on raids and trades? Or were things more fluid with everyone pitching in as needed? Some evidence suggests women held considerable authority inside the longhouse, managing property and even passing on heirlooms. Others argue the picture was more nuanced, varying by region and class. Either way, it's clear that the home was a full-time operation. You weren't idle. You were weaving, sewing, curing hides, drying herbs, or telling stories, while your hands twisted rope or sharpened tools. Even gossip was productive information passed hand to hand, like thread through a loom. Later in the day, you're invited to help with a less glamorous but deeply necessary task waste removal. You follow 2 teenagers out to the midden heap, a charming pile of bones, ash-broken pottery, and compost. It smells exactly as you'd expect. They show you how to layer it to keep it usable for fertilizer. You gag, they laugh. You reconsider everything. And yet these heaps are a gold mine for modern archaeologists. Broken combs, scorched grains, even lost trinkets, all of it tells the quiet story of real life, unfiltered by saga or scald. It's in the trash that history whispers. As the evening closes in, the longhouse shifts. The hearth brightens. Shadows stretch. Someone plucks a lyre and hums a tune. It's surprisingly sweet, like lullaby jazz played on sheep gut strings. A woman tells a story of Loki disguising himself as a mare to distract a giant's horse. You raise an eyebrow, she shrugs. It's always the weird ones you remember. That's true. The weird ones do stick. As you curl up on a mattress of straw and sheep wool wrapped in a musty fur, you realize something odd. You're getting used to the smell, to the noise, to the closeness of 20 breathing bodies, each snoring in their own offbeat rhythm. Life in a longhouse isn't glamorous. It's smoky cluttered and occasionally involves stepping on a chicken in the dark. But it's also warm, safe, and human in the deepest sense. It's not about personal space, it's about shared space. And tonight, as the embers glow and someone hums softly beside you, the shared space feels like a small, flickering fortress against the vast, frozen world outside. You wake up to a sheep licking your face. This is now your alarm clock. Around you, the longhouse stirs, slowly murmurs creaking wood. Someone coughing like they have just smoked a pipe full of pine needles. You hear the muffled sound of a pot being stirred, the quiet clatter of wooden bowls, and Somewhere near your foot, the distinct squawk of a chicken, deeply offended by something. No one in the Viking Age had the luxury of sleeping in, especially not when there's weaving to be done, because today you're learning how clothing actually happened. No, not the fur-lined battle cloaks and tunics so often plastered across TV screens, but the actual back-aching, finger-blistering process of making clothes from scratch. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most Viking clothing was made from wool, woven by hand, using loom spindles and an almost fanatical patience with tangles. Linen was also used when available for lighter, cooler garments. But wool was life. You couldn't throw a stone in a Viking settlement without hitting something made of sheep. First comes the wool itself, which means you guessed it. Sheep shearing. You're led outside to meet your new coworkers, a small flock of shaggy, suspicious-eyed sheep. They eye you like they know you've never held shears before, which you haven't. The shearing isn't done with modern scissors, of course. It's all rough iron blades and a whole lot of awkward fumbling. You manage to trim about 3 inches off one sheep's flank before it bolts and knocks over a bucket of water. One of the older women pats your arm. Not bad for a first time, she lies kindly. The fleece once gathered is cleaned mostly. That means removing burrs, manure insects, and everything else you'd rather not think about when wearing a sweater. Then it's washed in water that's only sometimes warm and always smells vaguely like wet dog. Next up, carding. This involves brushing the wool with 2 wooden paddles covered in metal teeth to align the fibers. It's repetitive, calming, and slightly dangerous if you're not paying attention. You stab your thumb twice, swear under your breath, and realize you've become part of the ancient lineage of people who have bled into future clothing. Then comes spinning. You're handed a drop spindle, a smooth wooden stick with a weighted disc, and shown how to twist the carded wool into yarn. It looks easy when someone else does it. You, however, immediately create a lump that looks like a moth-eaten ferret. Still, you spin, and spin, and spin. The rhythm starts to settle in. The wool tightens into string. The string coils around the spindle. Time slows. Now for the loom. And here's your quirky tidbit. Vikings used upright warp-weighted looms where the threads hung vertically and were tensioned by hanging stones, sometimes actual beach rocks with holes carved through them. There's something beautiful about it, this blend of stone wood and wool, like weaving a wall out of clouds. Thread by thread, row by row, you begin to understand the effort behind a single tunic. It takes weeks to produce enough cloth for one person. And dyeing, that's a whole extra process involving plants' lichens, fermented urine, yes, really, and a deep, possibly magical level of patience. Today's weaver shows you a collection of natural dyes, a dusky yellow from birch leaves, a red from madder root, and a surprisingly deep blue from woad, a plant that smells like a compost bin when processed, but gives garments a bold hue. You're told that bright colors were valued not because they were flashy, but because they took real effort to achieve. Here's where scholars start squabbling again. Did Vikings dress plainly or wear vibrant, decorated clothing? Some historians argue that Norse folks wore mostly muted earth tones. Others point to surviving textile fragments, dyed threads, and sagas that mention red cloaks and gold trim. As usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, and it varied widely by status and occasion. You're handed a nearly finished tunic. The wool is thick and soft, surprisingly warm even with the wind picking up outside. It's rough by modern standards, but it fits. And just knowing how long it took to make it feels valuable in a way no fast fashion hoodie ever could. But clothing wasn't just function, It was identity. You see a man lacing on a tablet woven belt, its pattern intricate and geometric. A woman adjusts her brooches large, ornate, used not just to fasten her dress, but to display rank and taste. Children run past in tunics patched a dozen times but still whole. Even here in a world where survival trumps style, people still want to look good. Accessories mattered. Jewelry wasn't always about wealth. It could be symbolic, ritualistic, or purely decorative. A simple bronze ring, a bone pin, a string of glass beads from a far-off trade partner. Each piece told a story. You learned that Viking women often wore apron dresses held up by those famous oval brooches with decorative chains linking them. Sometimes these chains held tools, keys, knives, small combs. It was equal parts fashion and utility, think medieval EDC everyday carry, but make it chic. By afternoon, your fingers are sore, your back aches, and your respect for medieval textile workers has ballooned to the size of a wool-covered moon. You've carded, spun, dyed, and woven enough to make about half a scarf? Maybe. On a good day, someone gifts you a pair of nail-binding mittens handmade using a looping technique that predates knitting. They're clumsy looking, but absurdly warm, and your hands immediately stop aching. You'd cry with gratitude if your tear ducts weren't currently frozen. As night approaches, the longhouse dims again. But this time you pay attention to the clothing hanging near each bedroll. The variety of patterns, the frayed cuffs, the well-mended elbows. These aren't costumes. They're everyday armor against wind rain and the slow erosion of time. You lie down in your wool tunic wrapped in a fur cloak that smells faintly of last week's stew, and realize that no one in this world ever owned too many clothes. Every thread was fought for spun by hand, soaked in dye and dried in cold wind. Every patch was a choice, every stitch a quiet survival. So the next time someone in the modern world says Vikings wore fur and leather, you'll smile. Because now you know they made their clothes, slowly, painfully, beautifully, and you're wearing the proof. You wake to the soft thud of someone splitting wood outside the longhouse. The air is colder this morning, your breath fogging in front of you like a slow-moving ghost. Someone hands you a chunk of barley bread and a bowl of lukewarm broth breakfast again, and motions for you to follow. Today's task, you're helping with repairs. Not dramatic siege walls or ship decks, but the more humble backbone of Viking existence, everyday tools and basic home maintenance. This is the gritty, often forgotten layer of history where civilization actually survives. Your host, a middle-aged man with a beard that looks like it's been braided by a drunk squirrel, leads you to the tool shed, or what passes for one. It's a lean-to structure that seems like it might fall over if a goat sneezes near it. Inside, a treasure trove of implements, axes, chisels, carving knives, augers, and a wooden mallet that looks suspiciously like it's been repurposed from a table leg. Here's your grounded historical fact. For the day, Vikings were expert woodworkers, and much of their daily life depended on this skill. From housing to ships to utensils to sleds, wood was everywhere, and shaping it properly meant knowing which tree to fell, how to season the timber, and how to carve it without ruining the grain. You're handed an axe well-worn heavy and just sharp enough to keep you nervous. Today you're helping split timber for roof repairs. The longhouse roof sags in places, especially where snow has melted and refrozen into ice dams. The beams above your bed groan every time someone sneezes. It's a miracle the chickens haven't fallen through yet. The wood cutting takes time. First, you help fell a tree, not a giant pine, but a medium-sized birch. You're shown how to aim your strikes with rhythm, not brute force, and you quickly learn that if you don't swing right, the axe bites wrong and sends shocks up your arms like you've just high-fived Thor. Once felled, the tree is stripped of bark, which can later be used for binding insulation or even crude writing surfaces. Then the trunk is split along its grain using wedges and mallets. You miss a few times. You hit your foot once. Everyone politely pretends not to notice. And here's your quirky tidbit. Viking children often made their first knives around the age of 7 or 8, not as weapons, but as tools. Carving was both necessity and play, and many archaeological finds suggest kids were actively learning craftsmanship from a young age. No YouTube tutorials, just blood, sweat, and splinters. After splitting wood, you're taken to the forge. Not the sprawling, flame-belching cavern of fantasy novels, but a compact, soot-stained corner of the village with a simple bellows system and a smoldering charcoal pit. You're introduced to the blacksmith, a short, wiry woman with arms like tree trunks and a permanent layer of ash in her eyebrows. She shows you how to heat a horseshoe until it glows red, then hammers it on an anvil with practiced precision. Sparks fly. The rhythm is hypnotic. You try your hand at it and manage to produce something that vaguely resembles a bent spoon. She doesn't even laugh. First one's always ugly, she says. In truth, blacksmiths held enormous respect in Viking communities. They weren't just tool makers, they were borderline magical. Shaping metal with fire and force was seen as a sacred skill, sometimes even linked to the gods. Historians still debate how much supernatural reverence was placed on smiths, but in the sagas they're often depicted as wise, solitary, and vaguely dangerous. Midday, someone calls you over to help mend a cart. One of its wheels has cracked, and you watch as a team carefully lifts the axle and fits a new wooden rim onto the old hub. No nails, just pegs, dowels, and precise joinery. It holds. The cart creaks along the path again, pulled by an aging ox who looks about 90% retired and 10% annoyed. Your hands are filthy. Your shoulders ache. But you start to notice something. Nothing is wasted here. Even broken tools are melted down or repurposed. Scraps of wood become handles, toys, or kindling. Bent nails are straightened. A worn-out comb becomes a spindle weight. Repairs aren't a chore, they're culture, continuity, survival. You pass a woman darning socks with bone needles and coarse thread spun from nettle fiber. Her fingers move quickly automatically as she explains that the best way to keep your feet dry is not to own fancy shoes, it's to never let your socks die. Simple, eternal wisdom. Here's where modern expectations take a nap. Vikings weren't minimalist by design, they were maximalist of utility. The average household had dozens of tools containers and everyday objects, all designed for specific tasks, most of them handmade, handed down, or bartered for. By late afternoon, the longhouse roof is patched, the tool handles rewrapped, and your fingernails are the color of volcanic ash. You find yourself staring at a humble wooden spoon in your hand, freshly carved, smooth, still warm from the friction. You didn't know it was possible to feel proud of a spoon, but here you are. The evening rolls in with soft orange light and the crackling of the hearth. Someone roasts a skewer of root vegetables. Another person uses a repaired spindle to make more yarn. The blacksmith, still sooty, mends a broken knife handle near the fire, surrounded by children watching in quiet awe. A man recounts the time a traveler tried to repair his own boots with pitch and ended up gluing them to his hands. Everyone laughs. It's a good story. Possibly true, possibly exaggerated, But in a world where shoes are priceless and repair is a kind of prayer, it hits differently. As you curl up on your creaky straw mattress spoon, tucked into your belt like a badge of honor, you start to understand the rhythm of this place. Tools aren't just tools, they're extensions of lives reshaped by every dent, stain, and repair. Every nick tells a story, and you in your wool tunic with soot in your hair and blisters forming just beneath your calluses, you've become part of that story too. You wake up once again to a chorus of snoring and the low hum of someone outside grinding grain. It's not glamorous, but neither is survival. You stretch feeling the stiffness of yesterday's carpentry adventures still lingering in your arms and wander toward the sound of steady rhythmic scraping. Today's lesson food. Not the feast hall banquet stuffed with roasted boar legs and overflowing meat horns. Not the heroic TV montages where warriors bite into chickens like they're made of cotton candy. No, this is the day-to-day Viking diet, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner of regular people. Your host, a woman with wind-chapped cheeks and the calm expression of someone who has stirred too many pots in her lifetime, greets you with a nod. She's grinding barley into flour using a large quernstone. It's a two-piece tool the top stone rotates with the help of a wooden handle, and you feed the grain through the hole in the center. It's more workout than kitchen appliance. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Barley was the cornerstone of the Viking diet used to make bread porridge and ale. Wheat existed, but it was rarer and considered a luxury. Rye and oats filled in the gaps depending on what the local soil could tolerate without pitching a fit. You take a turn at the quern. Within seconds, your arms burn. You rotate the stone, grind the grain, and try not to inhale the fine dust cloud that puffs out with every rotation. It's like working out in a sandstorm, but hey, all that fiber is probably good for you. Someone hands you a lump of dough already shaped and ready for baking. The oven is not an oven. It's a flat stone surface set near the hearth, where fires are built, then scraped away, leaving the stones hot enough to bake small rounds of bread. They're unleavened, dense, chewy. You bite in and immediately taste smoke earth and maybe one too many burnt grains. Delicious, kind of. Now comes the porridge. Grain is boiled in water or milk, sometimes thickened with mashed beans or root vegetables, and flavored with whatever you have on hand, berries in summer, salt, and dried herbs in winter, or if you're lucky, a splash of honey. You take a bite and discover the shocking truth. Viking porridge wasn't terrible. It's simple, warming, and strangely comforting, like your stomach is getting a gentle hug. You spot a pot hanging over the fire, bubbling lazily. It's stew. You peer inside and see chunks of fish onions, bits of cabbage, and something that might be wild garlic. Your host tells you they call this a perpetual stew, it never fully empties. New ingredients are added daily, old ones absorbed into the broth. It's dinner and a time machine. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Viking-age stews reportedly included seaweed and even fermented fish paste, not unlike a Norse version of miso. Tasty, questionable. Nutritious, absolutely. Midday, you're tasked with helping gather ingredients. You're handed a basket and directed toward the woods and shoreline. This is foraging Viking style. You find wild sorrel, tangy and lemony, along with nettles, ouch, yarrow, and wild mushrooms that your guide insists are definitely not the deadly kind. Comforting. Fishing is next. You're given a net, a small canoe-looking vessel, and instructions. Your guide paddles out with a practiced ease while you flail with the oars like someone trying to fight off an octopus. Eventually, you toss the net into the fjord and hope for the best. By evening, the catch includes two small cod, a suspicious eel, and what might be a boot. The cod are cleaned heads and all and dropped into the stew like honored guests. The eel is saved for drying and preservation. The boot is quietly buried behind the longhouse. You return to the settlement just in time to help smoke some fish. A rack is set up over a slow, smoldering fire. You learn that smoke not only flavors the meat, but also helps dry it, making it last longer. Preservation was everything in the Viking diet. Salt smoke drying, fermenting, each a way to stretch limited resources across long winters. And here's where the historians start wrestling again. How much meat did Vikings actually eat? Sagas and legends would have you believe they feasted daily. But evidence from bone chemistry and middens, those glamorous ancient trash heaps, suggests otherwise. Most people ate fish, dairy, grains, and seasonal produce. Meat was occasional, more celebration than routine. You're invited to help churn butter. This involves shaking a container of cream for an amount of time that feels deeply unfair. Eventually it clumps. You drain off the buttermilk and press the butter into a wooden mold. It's grainy, pale, and tastes like heaven after a day of bread and boiled fish. In a quiet moment, someone shows you a small stash of dried apples and nuts traded for cloth last season. It's dessert. It's treasure. You each nibble a slice of dried apple like it's made of gold leaf and unicorn tears. As the sun dips low, you watch the firelight flicker across the stone pots and wooden bowls that carried every meal. Someone scrapes a dish with a carved spoon, getting every last bit of stew. Nothing is wasted. Not food, not time, not effort. And for a moment, you realize something eating in the Viking world wasn't about flavor fireworks or for Instagram-worthy plates. It was about survival with style. Every dish had a purpose. Every ingredient had a season, and every meal was shared. You sit back, your belly full of warm porridge and cod stew, and think about how far removed your modern snacks are from all this. You miss your chips and chocolate, sure, but you've never worked this hard to earn a bowl of soup before. And that makes it taste better. You burrow back under your furs that night with your new favorite wooden spoon and a crumb of barley bread. Your dreams are simple porridge fish, maybe a really competent eel, and the warmth of a hearth that's fed not just by fire, but by everything that keeps people fed together. You wake to the smell of smoke, not fire danger smoke, but the soft curling tendrils of hearth smoke mixed with wool and damp earth. It's barely dawn, and the longhouse is already stirring. People shuffle past in half sleep, bundling up and muttering about needing to check the livestock. Today, you're going to meet the animals. Not the mighty stallions of Viking sagas or the fire-breathing beasts of Norse mythology. Sorry, no dragons here. Just cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and the ever-suspicious chickens. But make no mistake, these animals are not just background noise. They're central to survival, wealth, even status in the Viking world. You trudge through the muddy paddock, avoiding frozen puddles and suspicious piles. A man waves you over with a pitchfork. He's wearing layers of wool, a leather belt, with tools hanging off it like charms, and boots patched so many times they look like cloth sculptures. He hands you a bucket and gestures toward the goat pen. You are now a Viking farmhand. Here's your historical anchor. Viking farms were small and often mixed use, meaning they raised multiple kinds of animals for meat, milk, hides, and manure. Wealthier farms had more livestock, but even modest homesteads had a few cows or goats grazing nearby. You enter the goat pen, where you are immediately greeted, ambushed by a group of very pushy goats. One sniffs your boot, another nibbles your tunic. You try not to panic. You've never milked anything before. Your guide shows you how to hold the bucket just so then gently press and pull at the udder. It's surprisingly mechanical. Warm. A little too warm? You try, you succeed. Sort of. Your first few squeezes result in foam and splatter, and something that might have insulted the goat. But eventually you get the hang of it, and by the end you have nearly a full cup. The goat stares at you like she expected more. Here's your quirky tidbit: goat milk was actually preferred by some Viking communities for cheese making because it curdled more reliably in colder climates. The resulting cheese could be stored and traded, or just grated onto stew when you really wanted to flex. Next up, the cows. Much calmer, much larger, and significantly smellier. You learn that cows were prized not just for milk and meat, but also for their sheer presence. Cattle were a measure of wealth, and fines in Viking law codes were often calculated in head of cattle. You didn't just own a cow, you owned economic leverage. Pigs, on the other hand, were less glamorous. They were kept mostly for meat, especially in areas with access to forests, where pigs could forage for acorns and roots. The pig pen is fragrant. One squeals when it sees you and immediately runs headfirst into a fence post. You and the pig have something in common now. You're both confused about this relationship. And of course, chickens, small, irritable, opinionated birds. You try to collect eggs without being pecked. You fail once, and then learn to speak chicken body language like it's your second dialect. You find 5 eggs, 2 of which are warm. Victory. Now comes feeding. You haul hay, sprinkle grains, refill troughs. Some animals need scraps from the previous night's stew. Others just want to stare at you and chew in slow, judgmental silence. It's the most exhausting form of good morning you've ever experienced. By midday, you're covered in hay bits, suspicious damp spots, and the rich smell of life raw, unfiltered, unsanitized. You sit for a quick meal of bread and cheese near the sheepfold. Someone is shearing wool with long iron shears. It's careful work, more like sculpting than cutting. The fleece peels away in mats that are saved, cleaned and spun into yarn. Sheep weren't just for sweaters, they were the textile factories of the Viking world. You try your hand at spinning. The spindle drops, like it's been personally insulted by your touch. A kind older woman guides your hands and shows you the rhythm of twist, pinch, pull. You produce about 3 inches of questionable yarn, but hey, it's a start. By afternoon, there's talk of illness among the animals. A calf hasn't eaten since morning. This is where Viking animal care becomes surprisingly advanced. Your host pulls out a bundle of dried herbs, mixes a slurry of warm water, and pours it gently down the calf's throat using a horn. You ask about this treatment. She shrugs, old trick. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. We try. Here's where scholars begin arm wrestling again. Historians still argue whether Viking animal care was based more on empirical knowledge or ritual practices. Some say it was pragmatic, rooted in observation and experimentation. Others argue charms, runes, and chants were often used, especially when logic failed. It was probably both. When in doubt, chant while feeding a goat garlic mash. That night, you sit by the hearth and listen as someone recounts how their great-grandfather saved a sheep from frostbite by wrapping its hooves in hot ash. Is it true? Who knows? But the point is clear: in a world where a single cow could mean the difference between surviving winter or not, animals were treated with a level of importance that bordered on reverence. You begin to see livestock not as background characters, but as economic partners. Cows were milk machines and currency. Goats were lawnmowers with attitude and cheese. Pigs were walking bacon, but also compost recyclers. Chickens living alarm clocks and breakfast factories, they weren't pets. They weren't decorations. They were the living infrastructure of the Viking world. As you curl up that evening, your hands smell faintly of goat, your clothes carry a hint of pig pen, and there's a smudge of milk on your sleeve. But your belly's full of cheese and barley, and your head buzzes with the knowledge that Viking life wasn't just about raiding and rowing, it was also about keeping a grumpy chicken alive through a snowstorm. And that, oddly enough, might be the more impressive feat. You awaken to the distant clatter of hooves and the sharp cries of a few dogs bounding through the early morning mist. Today, the village stirs with a different energy. There's a sense of movement, of journeys planned and errands called. You're invited to accompany the riders. Yes, horses. The often overlooked stars of Viking transport scouting and even warfare. Unlike the dramatic dragon-proud ships slicing through icy seas, Viking horses were smaller, sturdier, and much more versatile beasts. You approach the stable where several compact but muscular ponies snuffle and stamp their breath, steaming in the cold. The stable smells of hay horse sweat and something faintly herbal, a mixture of dried heather and oats. Your guide, a wiry, sunburned woman named Sigrid, gives you a quick tutorial. Unlike the sleek steeds of medieval knights, Viking horses were often ridden bareback or with simple wooden saddles. No fancy metal stirrups here, that invention comes later. Instead, riders kept balance through skill and practice, gripping with knees and using reins sparingly. Here's your basic fact. Horses in Viking Age Scandinavia were smaller than modern breeds, averaging about 13 to 14 hands. Tall, roughly the size of a large pony, but incredibly hardy and sure-footed. Their size was an asset, allowing them to navigate rugged terrain with surprising agility. You mount one, a surprisingly patient animal named Grani, which immediately makes you feel like you're in a saga, even if you wobble more than you'd like to admit. Sigrid encourages you to hold the reins loosely and trust your legs. Easy to say. The ride begins slowly, a trot through muddy trails lined with spruces dripping wet from the morning dew. You feel the horse's rhythm, the bounce of each step, the scent of pine and earth flooding your senses. It's peaceful calming, even if you keep double-checking your grip so you don't accidentally become the village's first dismounted Viking. Your guide points out different horse tack, simple leather bridles bits, and rope reins. Nothing ornate but effective. You're told that Viking riders prized speed and endurance over fancy gear. Horses were vital for communication raids and everyday travel. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Viking horses were buried with their owners in elaborate funerals believed to accompany their masters into the afterlife. Not just practical animals, but spiritual companions. As you ride, you pass by a small stream where other villagers are washing horses, scrubbing away the grime of long days on the trail. The horses whinny softly, flicking their tails at flies or resting heads against fences. You stop briefly at a trading post, a rough cluster of wooden buildings and tents. Here, horses aren't just transportation, they're currency. Bartering for a good horse could mean the difference between staying alive on a trip or ending up stranded with sore feet. The riders unload cargo bags of dried fish, bundles of wool, and hand-carved tools. The trading post buzzes with a mixture of languages, Old Norse Gaelic, and even some distant tongues you don't recognize. The horses stand quietly, ever patient. You learn that Viking horse culture varied by region. In some areas, horses were raised primarily for riding. In others, they were beasts of burden pulling carts or plows. The diversity is a reminder that the Viking world was not a single uniform place, but a mosaic of practices. Historians still debate the extent of horses' roles in warfare versus everyday life. While sagas romanticize swift horse mounted raids, archaeological evidence suggests many Vikings preferred ships and infantry for major battles. Still, horses were essential scouts, messengers, and rapid response units. By late afternoon, you return to the village, your legs pleasantly sore and your balance much improved. The stable hands help unsaddle Grani, brushing her down with brooms made from twigs and straw. You watch as Sigrid feeds the horses a mixture of oats and root vegetables. As the sun sinks low, a village elder recounts a story of a legendary horse named Sleipnir, eight-legged and faster than the wind. You smile at the familiar myth, now feeling a touch more connected to the very real horses trotting beneath you today. The night settles softly around the longhouse. You lie back on your bed of straw, a new respect for the humble Viking horse stirring in your chest. They may not have been dragons, but they carried the weight of journey's survival and stories untold. You drift off, ears still echoing with the soft rhythm of hooves and the whisper of pine needles in the breeze, ready for whatever tomorrow's tasks will bring. You wake to the distant clink of metal on metal, and a faint smoky tang that tickles your nose. Today is for crafting. Not the simple chopping or cooking, but the intricate work of Viking smiths and artisans who shape raw materials into tools, weapons, and jewelry that define both everyday life and legend. You follow a narrow path lined with wood smoke to a blacksmith's workshop, a smoky hut built of stone and timber. Inside, a fire burns fiercely in a forge, the air thick with heat, and the sharp scent of burning charcoal and iron. Sparks fly like tiny stars as the smith hammers a glowing piece of metal on an anvil, shaping it with rhythmic, precise blows. Here's your solid historical fact. Viking smiths were highly skilled and central to the community, forging everything from nails and tools to swords and intricate brooches. Their work was both practical and artistic, blending function with style. You watch closely as the smith pulls a nearly molten strip from the fire and hammers it flat, folding it again and again. This folding process, often romanticized as pattern welding, strengthens the blade and creates swirling decorative patterns on the steel surface. You reach out and feel the warmth radiating from the metal. It's as alive as a breathing creature. The smith offers you a small hammer, and with guidance you try striking a heated nail blank on the anvil. The sound rings loud in the cramped workshop, metal on metal, each strike shaping a simple but essential piece. It's harder than it looks, requiring focus, timing, and a bit of brute strength. Here's a fun and strange tidbit. Some Viking smiths believed their craft was touched by magic, with legends describing dwarves and elves as master metalworkers who gifted humans with knowledge. It's not just practical skill, but a spark of something almost supernatural. You're handed a piece of shaped bronze and shown how to carve simple designs with a small chisel. Vikings loved decorating their tools and weapons, not just for aesthetics, but as markers of identity and status. Intricate knotwork, animal motifs, and symbols like Thor's hammer could be found on everything from sword hilts to belt buckles. The conversation turns to the mysterious Ulfbert swords, renowned Viking blades bearing inscriptions and made from superior steel. Their exact origin is debated. Some think they were locally made, others say imported or even produced with lost forge techniques. Historians still argue whether the craftsmanship was a closely guarded secret or widespread among smithing communities. Nearby, a woman spins thin strands of silver into delicate chains, weaving together necklaces and rings. You try your hand at threading tiny beads onto a wire. Your fingers fumble and the beads scatter across the wooden table. The artisan chuckles softly, saying, "Patience is the key, as with all crafts." Outside, a carpenter carves a wooden figurehead for a ship, his chisel tapping out a fierce animal face, something between a dragon and a wolf. The carving will be painted and attached to the prow, meant to inspire fear and respect during raids or trading voyages. You get a chance to whittle a small piece of oak, working the knife slowly along the grain. The shavings curl in your hands like fragile ribbons. It's calming, meditative. You realize that crafts weren't just about making things, they were rituals of focus and connection, a way to turn raw nature into culture. As the day ends, the smith heats one last piece of metal and plunges it into water with a satisfying hiss, the quenching that hardens the steel. You watch the steam rise, thinking about how much the Vikings depended on these hidden fires to shape their world. You settle down for the night, hands stained with soot and silver dust, feeling part of a lineage stretching back through time where sweat skill and a little bit of legend come together in the forge's glow. You wake to a cool breeze carrying the faint, briny scent of the sea. The sky above is a pale canvas streaked with soft pinks and grays, and the sound of gulls calling overhead invites you out of the longhouse. Today, the rhythm of life pulls you toward the water, where Vikings built not just ships but entire communities around the restless sea. You follow a worn path to the shoreline, where longships rest on sandy banks, their sleek hulls gleaming faintly beneath a thin layer of morning mist. The ships are smaller than you expected, no towering dragon-headed leviathans here, but vessels crafted with subtle genius. The hulls curve gracefully, built to slice through waves, but shallow enough to navigate rivers and inlets. Their design feels almost alive, responding to the gentle rocking of the tide. Here's a fundamental fact to hold on to: Viking longships were technological marvels of their time, designed for speed, flexibility, and durability, allowing them to sail vast distances across the North Atlantic and beyond. Their shallow draft allowed Vikings to land on beaches or riverbanks, launching raids or trading missions with remarkable ease. You approach a group of boat builders, their hands weathered and steady, working on a ship's frame. They use traditional tools, adzes, axes, and wooden mallets, each strike echoing 1,000 years of craftsmanship. You run your fingers along the hull, feeling the carefully overlapped planks of clinker construction, held together by iron rivets and tarred to keep the water out. One builder hands you a strip of birch bark to inspect. This natural sealant, combined with pitch made from pine resin, ensured the ship's hull remained waterproof. The scent is earthy and sticky, a reminder that Viking technology was deeply rooted in natural materials. You learn that constructing a single longship could take months and required the combined skills of woodworkers, smiths, and sailors. The ship was not just a tool, but a symbol of power, freedom, and connection to the wider world. Your guide explains the ship's rigging and sail: a large square sail made of woven wool, treated with lanolin to resist moisture. The sail could catch even the slightest wind, propelling the vessel forward, while the rowers filled in when the sea was calm or the wind uncooperative. Viking crews were small but highly coordinated, with each person playing a critical role. You try your hand at rowing on a makeshift bench. The oar feels heavier than expected, but when you push against the imagined water, you sense how rhythm and teamwork would have been vital to keep the ship moving smoothly. Here's a quirk. Some Viking longships featured ornamental carvings on the prow, often depicting dragons or serpents believed to ward off evil spirits and sea monsters. Whether they really scared off monsters or just rival raiders is part of the ongoing debate among historians. You wander to the shipyard where smaller boats and fishing vessels are also being repaired. Fishing was an essential part of Viking life-feeding communities during the long winters when farming was difficult. Nets are laid out to dry, woven with meticulous care to catch herring cod and other local fish. Nearby, a woman sorts through a pile of dried fish, preparing them for smoking, and salting, a preservation method that allowed Vikings to store food for months. The smell is pungent but comforting, a reminder that survival required patience and planning. As you watch a group of men load barrels of salted fish onto a ship bound for distant markets. Trading networks stretched from Iceland to the British Isles, Russia, and beyond. Vikings were not only raiders, but also savvy merchants exchanging goods like furs, amber, and slaves for silver, spices, and fine cloth. Here's the scholarly knot. Historians still debate the balance between Viking raiding and trading. Were they primarily warriors or merchants? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, shaped by opportunity and necessity. The afternoon sun warms your back as you join a small crew preparing to set sail. You help raise the sail, feeling it billow above you, tugging at the ropes with a sudden force. The boat lurches forward as oars dip into the water, slicing smoothly through gentle waves. The salt air fills your lungs and the horizon stretches endlessly. For Vikings, the sea was a path to adventure and survival, a place of danger and possibility. You imagine the stories whispered aboard these vessels, the thrill of discovery, the fear of storms, and the hope of a safe return. Back on shore, children practice knot tying with bits of rope, their laughter mingling with the cries of gulls. Fishing lines dangle from docks, promising fresh catches while merchants haggle over prices in a cacophony of voices. As dusk falls, you settle by a campfire near the beach, the crackling flames reflecting off the water. Someone pulls out a wooden flute, playing a soft melody that drifts over the waves. You lean back, tired but filled with a quiet awe for the complex relationship Vikings had with the sea, not just as raiders, but as builders, fishers, traders, and travelers. You close your eyes, the rhythmic lap of water against the hull, echoing in your mind, carrying you gently into dreams of distant shores and endless horizons. You awaken slowly, the chill of dawn creeping beneath your blankets, blending with the faint aroma of peat smoke wafting from the village hearths. Today, you're stepping into the heart of Viking domestic life, the longhouse, the place where work, rest, family, and community intertwine under a single roof. It's here that the essence of everyday Viking existence pulses quietly but steadily, far from the saga-filled battles and sea voyages you've been imagining. You step inside one of these iconic wooden structures, its interior shadowy but alive with flickering firelight from a central hearth. The walls are lined with benches, hides, and wooden chests filled with everyday necessities. The air carries the mingled scents of cooking stew smoke and the faint earthiness of dried herbs hanging from the beams. The low ceiling presses you slightly, a cozy but practical design to conserve warmth through the long winters. Here's a cornerstone fact to settle in with Viking longhouses were multi-purpose spaces, often housing not only the family but their animals during cold months and serving as workshop storage and social halls. The entire household's life took place within these roughly rectangular buildings, sometimes over 20 meters long, buzzing with activity. You watch as the family gathers, men sharpening tools by the fire, women spinning wool, and children chasing each other between benches. The household isn't just nuclear. It often includes extended family and sometimes fostered children or servants. This fluidity shaped a strong community bond and shared survival strategy. Your guide, a woman named Freya, explains how each task fit into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and needs of the family. The spinning wheel clicks steadily as women transform fleece into yarn. You try your hand fingers clumsy at first as the thread tangles and slips away. Freya smiles knowingly this is skill learned over years, not minutes. Nearby, the smell of freshly baked rye bread pulls you closer. Baking was a crucial daily ritual. The Vikings prized their dense, hearty bread often baked in simple clay ovens or directly on heated stones. The bread wasn't just food, it was a symbol of home and sustenance, especially when grain was scarce during poor harvests. Here's a slightly odd but charming detail. Archaeologists have found Viking bread stamps, small carved wooden tools used to imprint patterns on loaves before baking, almost like a Viking-era branding or signature. A reminder that even the humblest foods carried meaning and identity. You're invited to help prepare a stew, stirring a pot over the fire. The ingredients are humble dried fish, barley, wild herbs, and root vegetables, but the result is hearty and warming. Freya explains that Vikings made use of every part of an animal or plant, avoiding waste in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The longhouse's walls are decorated with woven tapestries and carved wooden panels depicting mythic scenes. Thor wrestling giants, Odin's ravens watching from high branches. These decorations aren't merely ornamental. They reinforce cultural identity and shared belief stories whispered to children by the hearth's glow. You sit among the family as they share tales and songs. The men play a simple stringed instrument called a lyre, its melancholic notes filling the space. Storytelling was a sacred tradition. Histories, genealogies, and sagas passed down orally, weaving a tapestry of memory and meaning. Here's a scholarly puzzle. Historians still debate how much of Viking mythology was widespread belief versus elite storytelling, and whether the average person embraced all these gods or practiced a more practical spirituality. The truth likely varied between communities and individuals. As the day wanes, you learn about Viking hospitality customs. Visitors were welcomed warmly, often offered food and drink without question, and insults or violence toward guests were severely taboo. This hospitality was essential in a harsh environment, forging alliances and mutual support. Your guide explains how sleeping arrangements worked. Families often shared a single bed built from wood and stuffed with straw or animal skins. Privacy was minimal, but warmth was maximized, and the constant proximity strengthened bonds. This closeness might seem strange now, but was vital in cold communal life. Before sleep, the family gathers for a final ritual, a small libation, to honor the spirits of the home and ancestors. Freya pours a bit of mead into a wooden bowl, raising it silently to the ceiling beams. This quiet moment connects past and present, the living and the dead, in a shared circle of existence. You lie back on your straw mattress, hearing the crackle of the dying fire and the muffled breathing of the household settling down. The longhouse feels less like a building and more like a living organism, breathing, enduring, a center of life's delicate balance. As you drift towards sleep, you realize that Viking life was less about constant battle and more about these rhythms, the steady pulse of work, family, faith, and community weaving through every day, shaping resilience and identity in a world that demanded both strength and warmth. You rise to a crisp morning, the pale light slipping through a lattice window, painting soft squares on the earthen floor. Today, you find yourself outside the village, venturing into the vast, wild world where Vikings hunted and gathered. This is the frontier between cultivated land and untamed wilderness, the place where survival often depended on skill, patience, and respect for nature's rhythms. You follow a narrow forest path, soft with moss and littered with pine needles, the scent of spruce and damp earth enveloping you. The distant call of a hawk echoes overhead, and you catch a glimpse of a red squirrel darting between branches. This forest is both a resource and a challenge, a provider of food, fuel, and materials, but also a domain of danger and mystery. Here's a solid fact to anchor you. Vikings were skilled hunters and gatherers relying on game such as deer, elk, and wild boar, as well as birds, fish, and edible plants to supplement their diet year-round. Hunting required knowledge of animal behaviors, seasonal cycles, and specialized tools. You watch as a hunter prepares his bow, a carefully crafted weapon made from yew wood strung with sinew. He selects a sharp flint arrowhead and demonstrates the quiet, deliberate movements needed to avoid startling prey. The bow is surprisingly light in your hands, a testament to the Viking balance of strength and precision. Your guide points out tracks in the mud deer hoofprints, squirrel paths, and the faint impressions of bird feet. You learn how to read these signs, understanding the subtle language of the forest. A rustle in the underbrush prompts a flash of a hare disappearing into the thicket. Here's a quirky detail. Some Viking hunters used eagle stones, rare minerals believed to bring good luck and enhance hunting success, worn as amulets or placed near hunting grounds. Whether superstition or tradition, these stones add a magical layer to the practical world of hunting. You're invited to help set a simple snare trap, looping a noose of twine hidden among branches. It's an exercise in patience and craft, the quiet wait for nature's cooperation. The hunter explains that snaring was a common technique for smaller game, vital for daily sustenance. The forest is also a source of medicinal plants. Your guide shows you handfuls of yarrow used to staunch wounds, and birch bark prized for its antiseptic properties. Knowledge of these natural remedies was essential, passed down through generations, blurring the line between medicine and magic. The afternoon sun filters through the canopy as you gather berries, crowberries, and bilberries, small but rich in flavor. The picking is slow and deliberate, a quiet communion with the land. You're told that winter stores included dried fruits and herbs carefully prepared to last through the dark months. Fishing also plays a role here, with small streams yielding trout and salmon. Nets and fish traps woven from willow branches lie nearby, evidence of the community's skill at harvesting the sea's bounty inland. Freshwater fishing provided variety and ensured no one starved when ocean voyages were impossible. Here's the ongoing debate among scholars. How much did Vikings rely on hunting and gathering versus farming and animal husbandry? Archaeological evidence varies regionally, showing a flexible and adaptive economy rather than a rigid subsistence model. As the day cools, you join a group preparing a freshly caught deer. The processing is respectful and methodical, nothing wasted. Meat is divided for immediate use, smoking and drying. Hides will become clothing or shelter bones, tools, and ornaments. You help scrape and clean the skin, hands becoming sticky with natural oils. It's messy work, but deeply connected to survival. The process sparks stories from the group about hunts past, near misses, and legends of great beasts. The sky darkens, and you walk back to the village carrying bundles of herbs and berries. The forest seems alive with whispered secrets, a place where Vikings not only took from the land, but listened and learned. You settle in for the night, the earthy scents lingering on your clothes and skin. The day's quiet wilderness still hums in your veins, a reminder that Viking life was a constant dance with nature, sometimes harsh, sometimes generous, always demanding respect. As you close your eyes, the rustle of leaves and distant calls of animals mingle with your breath, soothing you into rest. You awake to a light drizzle tapping softly on the wooden roof, the air thick with the fresh scent of rain and damp earth. Today draws you into the spiritual realm of the Vikings, a world where gods and ancestors live alongside mortals in stories, rituals, and symbols. This invisible tapestry of belief shaped how Vikings understood themselves, their environment, and their place in the cosmos. You step outside and walk toward the sacred grove at the edge of the village, a quiet clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, their twisted branches like the arms of old protectors. The ground is soft beneath your feet, strewn with moss and scattered leaves. In the center, a simple wooden altar holds offerings of bread, mead, and small carved idols. The air hums with reverence and something just beyond sight. Here's your key fact. Viking religion was polytheistic and deeply intertwined with daily life, honoring a pantheon of gods like Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki, each embodying different aspects of existence such as war, fertility, and fate. Worship took place outdoors at Grove Springs and specially constructed temples. Your guide, a wise elder named Eric, explains how belief and practice were inseparable from survival and social order. Offerings. Sometimes food, sometimes weapons or crafted goods were made to gods and spirits to ensure good harvest, victory in battle, or protection from harm. You watch as he pours mead slowly over a stone, murmuring a prayer in Old Norse. The symbols around the grove catch your eye, runes carved into wood and stone. Intertwining lines forming knotwork patterns and images of animals sacred to different gods. Runes were more than just letters. They were believed to carry magical power capable of healing, protection, or curses. You run your fingers lightly over a small wooden talisman, inscribed with the rune for protection, feeling its rough edges and ancient energy. Here's a curious fact. Viking graves often included grave goods objects meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife, from weapons and jewelry to food, and even ships. These practices reflected a belief in a vibrant afterlife and the continuation of status beyond death. You ask about the afterlife itself. Eirik explains that beliefs varied widely, but common ideas included Valhalla, the hall of slain warriors chosen by Odin, and Helheim, a realm ruled by the goddess Hel for those who died of illness or old age. The concept of fate wired was ever present, weaving through life like an invisible thread. You watch as a group of villagers gather to perform a blot, a ritual sacrifice. No blood flows here today, but symbolic offerings, bowls of mead, roasted meats are raised to the sky. The chanting rises and falls like a wave, binding the community together in shared belief and hope. Here's the tricky part. Scholars debate how widespread and consistent were these religious practices across Viking society. Archaeologists find varying evidence suggesting local customs mixed with broader Norse mythologies, making Viking spirituality richly diverse. You notice that women often held significant roles as seers or priestesses vulvas who communicated with the spirits and foretold the future. One such woman, draped in a cloak of feathers and beads, chants softly, her voice weaving through the mist. Her presence commands respect and a touch of awe. The day continues with lessons on rune carving and divination. You try your hand at inscribing simple runes onto a piece of wood. It's harder than you expect. Each stroke must be deliberate, each line clear. The belief that runes held power made them sacred and not to be used lightly. Eirik shares tales of legendary heroes and gods, weaving myth and history seamlessly. You hear of Odin's endless quest for knowledge, Thor's battles against giants, and Freya's fierce protection of love and fertility. These stories were told around fire, serving as both entertainment and moral instruction. As the sun lowers behind the trees, casting long shadows across the sacred grove, you feel the presence of something enduring an ancient worldview that helped Vikings make sense of their harsh, unpredictable world. You return to the village with a quiet reverence, the symbols and stories lingering in your mind like a soft song. The spiritual life of the Vikings wasn't separate from their everyday existence, but was woven into every action, every breath. As night falls, you lay down comforted by the thought that even in the darkest times, faith provided light, guiding, protecting, and connecting the past with the present and beyond. You wake gently to the distant clatter of hammer on metal and the rhythmic scrape of a file against steel. Today's journey takes you into the clang and spark-filled forge, the fiery heart of Viking craftsmanship, where raw ore transforms into tools, weapons, and intricate art. The forge is both a place of creation and transformation, a crucible for Viking ingenuity. Stepping inside the smithy, the air is thick with heat and smoke. The walls are blackened by years of soot, while the ground is scattered with charcoal and scraps of metal. The fire blazes fiercely in the hearth, throwing warm orange light onto the faces of the blacksmiths. They work with focused intensity, hammering glowing iron on anvils, shaping the metal with a mix of brute strength and delicate skill. Here's a key fact to start with. Viking blacksmiths were highly skilled artisans producing everything from farming tools and household items to weapons of war like swords, axes, and spearheads. Their work was essential to both daily life and Viking military success. You watch a smith expertly draw out a blade from a glowing billet of iron, repeatedly heating and folding the metal to create layers. This technique, somewhat akin to pattern welding, increased the blade's strength and flexibility, a necessity for weapons that would see fierce combat. The faint wavy patterns on the blade's surface are both functional and beautiful, a signature of the smith's craftsmanship. One smith passes you a small piece of iron slag, the waste left over from smelting. Despite its rough appearance, slag provides clues to archaeologists about ancient metalworking techniques, fuel types, and trade routes. It's fascinating to hold a tiny remnant of a process that forged the Viking Age. You're shown the process of creating rivets, small iron pins used to bind parts of swords and shields. The rivets must be strong, yet precisely sized. A poorly made rivet could spell disaster in battle. The smith's hammer taps out a steady rhythm, punctuating the otherwise quiet forge. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Viking weapons were decorated with silver and gold inlays, often featuring intricate animal motifs, like serpents or wolves, blurring the line between tool and artwork. These embellishments indicated status and identity as much as utility. Your guide explains how iron ore was extracted from bogs and hillsides and then smelted in charcoal-fired furnaces. The process was labor-intensive and required specialized knowledge passed down through generations. The location of forges near woodlands and water sources was strategic, providing necessary fuel and cooling. You help shape a simple iron hook, feeling the weight of the hammer in your hands. The metal cools quickly in a bucket of water, with a sharp hiss hardening instantly. The smith explains that controlling the cooling process, quenching, was crucial to achieving the right balance of hardness and toughness. Beyond weapons, Viking smiths crafted everyday items: knives, scissors, keys, nails, and horseshoes. The blacksmith was indispensable, and his forge often served as a community hub, a place where news and gossip mingled with sparks and smoke. You explore a nearby workshop, where artisans carve intricate patterns into metal jewelry, torques, brooches, and arm rings, displaying the famed Viking art styles like the gripping beast and the intertwined serpent. These items weren't just decorative. They carried meaning, often symbolizing allegiance, wealth, or protection. There's a fascinating ongoing debate. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the extent of Viking trade in metal goods and how far their craftsmanship influenced or was influenced by cultures from Byzantium to the British Isles. The cross-cultural exchange was undoubtedly rich, but the exact networks and flows remain partly mysterious. You pause to admire a beautifully crafted sword hilt encrusted with garnets and silver filigree. Your guide explains that such weapons were often buried with their owners, a status symbol and spiritual talisman for the afterlife. The craftsmanship elevated the sword beyond mere weaponry to a treasured heirloom. The forge's heat seeps into your skin, mingling with the smell of burning charcoal and molten metal. You understand that blacksmiths were part scientists, part artists, and part mystics, working magic with fire and iron. As evening falls, you step outside, blinking against the sudden coolness. The forge's glow dims behind you, but the echoes of hammer strikes linger, a rhythm that once fueled Viking conquests and shaped history. You carry with you the raw power and quiet artistry of the forge, a reminder that Viking life was not just about raiding and sailing, but about creating and transforming, forging their world, one hammer strike at a time. You begin your day with the crisp bite of early morning air, the faint smell of salt and seaweed tugging at your senses. Today, you venture to the Viking harbor, where wood meets water in a dance of engineering adventure and commerce. The docks buzz quietly with activity, the scent of tar and pine sap hanging heavy as boats sway gently on the tide. This is the domain of the shipwright, the master builder, whose work shaped Viking history as much as any warrior's sword. Here, ships were crafted not just for battle, but for exploration trade and connecting far-flung communities across icy seas and rugged coastlines. Your first fact to settle on Viking longships were technological marvels of their time, lightweight, flexible, and fast designed to navigate open oceans and shallow rivers alike. Their symmetrical shape allowed quick changes in direction, and their shallow draft meant they could beach almost anywhere. You walk alongside a massive vessel under construction, its ribs arching gracefully like the skeleton of a giant sea creature. The shipwright explains the process. First, oak trees were carefully selected and felled their wood split rather than sawn to preserve strength. The keel, a long, sturdy spine, was laid down first, followed by planks fastened edge to edge with iron rivets. You watch as workers steam and bend planks to curve naturally around the hull, held in place by carefully shaped wooden pegs called tree nails. The caulking between planks involves a mixture of wool and tar, ensuring the ship is watertight. It's a meticulous collective effort, requiring immense knowledge and coordination. Here's a lesser-known detail. Vikings sometimes painted their ships with bold colors and intricate design spirals, serpents and dragon heads, both to intimidate enemies and to honor protective spirits. These images weren't just decorative, they carried spiritual weight. Your guide shares how ships varied by purpose. The sleek longship was perfect for raids and fast travel, but broader, heavier cargo ships Nars carried goods like furs, timber, and grain across the North Atlantic. The Nar's deep hull allowed for greater storage, vital for trade missions spanning months. You're invited to step aboard a replica ship, the deck creaking beneath your feet. The smell of fresh wood mingles with sea salt. You grip the oar, sensing the muscle and coordination needed to row in unison during voyages. The ship's design also allowed it to be sailed harnessing the wind when conditions favored. Here's an intriguing archaeological puzzle. Historians still debate exactly how Vikings navigated the vast, often foggy seas. Sunstones, primitive compasses, and knowledge of ocean currents likely played roles, but no definitive method survives. The mystery adds a hint of magic to their remarkable journeys. Nearby, a smith repairs iron fittings while women sew sails from thick woolen fabric treated with animal fat for durability. Shipbuilding was a village effort, each skill vital for launching a successful voyage. You hear stories of epic expeditions, Leif Erikson's voyage to Vinland, the opening of trade routes to Byzantium, and daring raids on distant shores. Ships were the lifeblood of Viking society, enabling mobility, wealth, and cultural exchange. At sunset, you watch a small boat glide away its sail, billowing softly in the fading light. The rhythmic splash of oars fades into the evening, calm a reminder of the sigh's call to adventure and survival. You return to the village harbor, feeling the pulse of countless journeys carried out over centuries, each ship a thread weaving Viking life into the vast tapestry of history. As night settles, you rest imagining the creak of timbers and the whisper of waves, a lullaby sung by the sea itself. You wake to a gentle drizzle softening the landscape, the faint murmur of village life stirring as smoke curls from chimneys. Today, you follow the quiet footsteps of Viking women, whose roles in family economy and society were far more complex than the usual tales of shield maidens and warrior queens. You start at a longhouse where a woman named Astrid is preparing the morning's tasks. Her hands are busy weaving wool on a large loom, threads crossing and looping into intricate patterns. The rhythmic clack of the shuttle is almost hypnotic. You notice how important textile work was. Clothing was not just necessity, but status, protection, and identity. Here's your historical anchor. Viking women managed households, farms, and businesses, often overseeing livestock, food production, and trade, especially when men were away on raids or voyages. Their economic contribution was vital to community survival. Astrid explains the process of wool preparation, shearing, sheep cleaning and carding the fibers, spinning them into yarn, and finally weaving or knitting. Different regions favored specific dyes and patterns, signaling origin or social rank. Natural dyes came from plants like woad, giving blues, or madder for reds. A quirky detail surfaces. Some Viking women used a plant called orpine to darken their hair naturally, creating striking contrasts against the pale Nordic skin. Beauty rituals were intertwined with nature's resources and carried symbolic meaning. You watch as Astrid prepares food, grinding grain into flour for flatbreads, chopping salted fish, and preserving berries. You learn that women controlled food storage, a task crucial to surviving harsh winters and unpredictable harvests. Barley, rye, and oats were staples often baked into dense, nourishing breads. There's an ongoing scholarly discussion. How much legal power did Viking women wield? Evidence from runestones and sagas suggests some had property rights and could initiate divorce, but the degree of autonomy likely varied regionally and over time. Astrid's story includes the care of children, education, and domestic skills, and participation in village decision-making. While not warriors, women's strength was social and economic pillars of continuity. You're invited to try your hand at spindle spinning. The delicate dance of twisting fibers into yarn feels surprisingly calming, connecting you to countless generations of women who did the same. Later, you visit a market where women barter goods, woolen cloth, honey-dried fish, and crafted jewelry. The marketplace bustles with negotiation laughter and occasional disputes. Women's presence in trade networks is evident. Some ran stalls or acted as agents for traveling merchants. Another interesting fact, archaeological finds show that women's graves often contained keys suggesting their role as household managers and guardians of the home's wealth. This symbolism speaks volumes about gendered responsibilities. As the day wanes, Astrid joins other women around a fire sharing stories and songs. The air fills with warmth and camaraderie, a reminder that community was forged as much by shared daily life as by grand events. You leave with a new appreciation for the quiet strength and complexity of Viking women, less often sung but no less vital. Their hands shaped wool food and family. Their voices carried tradition and change. As night falls, you imagine the longhouse glowing softly, a beacon of resilience and care in a harsh world. You close your eyes, comforted by the steady hum of life continuing through ages. You wake in the soft pre-dawn gloom, the chill of early morning biting gently through your woolen blanket. Today, you wander beyond the village borders into the dense northern forest, where the Vikings hunted, gathered, and lived in close communion with nature's rhythms. The woods are alive with whispered secrets, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the faint crack of twigs beneath your boots. Hunting was more than sport or sustenance. It was a crucial thread in the Viking tapestry of survival economy and even social identity. You trail alongside a seasoned hunter named Björn, whose sharp eyes and silent steps betray years of experience. To anchor your journey, Viking hunters pursued deer, elk, wild boar, and smaller game like hares and birds using bows, spears, traps, and trained hunting dogs. Meat supplemented their diets, but hunting also provided furs and hides essential for clothing and trade. Bjorn shows you his bow carved from yew and strung with animal sinew. The bow's gentle curve feels almost alive in your hands. He explains that crafting a good bow took patience and skill. The wood had to be strong, but flexible, shaped, and treated carefully to withstand the strain of hunting. You venture deeper into the forest, eyes scanning for movement. Bjorn points out subtle signs, bent grass, disturbed branches, and faint tracks in the mud. Hunting required intimate knowledge of animal behavior and habitat. Here's a curious tidbit. Some Viking hunting traps were ingeniously simple yet effective, using pits camouflaged with branches or snares set along known animal paths. These devices speak to practical ingenuity rather than brute force. Your guide tells you about the ritualistic side of hunting. Before setting out, Vikings might offer a prayer to gods like Odin or Skadi, goddess of the hunt in winter. Success was believed to depend as much on divine favor as skill blending faith with practicality. You try your hand at a wooden spear, learning to throw with a smooth, practiced motion. Though you miss the target several times, you sense the thrill ancient hunters must have felt, balancing patience and precision. In the dense underbrush, Bjorn points to a cluster of bird feathers arranged on a branch, a marker for other hunters, or a symbol left as a sign of respect for the animals. Such customs remind you that hunting was not merely extraction, but part of a spiritual relationship with nature. Here's an ongoing debate among historians. How sustainable were Viking hunting practices? Archaeological evidence shows periods of overhunting and resource depletion, but also signs of careful management and seasonal respect. The balance between use and conservation remains a complex question. You witness the preparation of animal pelts for tanning and crafting. The process involves scraping, smoking, and stretching hides to produce durable leather for clothing, shoes, and bindings. These materials were prized both locally and as trade goods. Later, back at the village, hunters and gatherers share their bounty. The smell of roasting venison fills the air, mingling with herbs and smoke. Gathered roots, berries, and mushrooms complement the meal, highlighting the Vikings' varied diet. You listen to tales of hunts gone awry, close calls with wild boars, encounters with wolves, and even superstitions about forest spirits protecting game. These stories passed from generation to generation, blending fact with folklore. As twilight deepens, you reflect on the intricate web of life woven between Vikings and their environment. Hunting was a test of skill, a connection to tradition, and a dance with the unpredictable wild. You settle down beneath a starlit sky, the forest's quiet pulse lulling you toward sleep. The day's lessons linger: respect for nature, reliance on community, and the timeless thrill of the chase. You wake gently to the soft stirrings of the Viking village. The early morning light filters through the wooden shutters, carrying with it the faint sounds of animals stirring and the quiet murmur of voices drifting through the chill air. Today, you're stepping into the bustling world of Viking trade, a sprawling and surprisingly sophisticated network of commerce that stretched from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the glittering bazaars of Byzantium and beyond. Trade wasn't just an afterthought or a sideline for the Vikings. It was a lifeline that helped bind their scattered settlements into a connected world, enabling goods, ideas, and cultures to flow like a secret river beneath the surface of their famously rough and tumble reputation. You stroll into the heart of the village marketplace. The air is thick with the mixed aromas of dried fish, fresh herbs, and burning pitch. Wooden stalls stand like sentinels along dusty lanes, draped with colorful textiles, gleaming bits of jewelry, and carefully stacked bundles of furs and hides. Nearby, a merchant haggles quietly over a handful of amber beads, their golden hue catching the weak sun. You can almost hear the pulse of countless deals made in this very spot over generations. First, here's your anchor. Fact: Vikings were master traders establishing vast networks that connected northern Europe with the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia. Their merchant ships, typically sturdy Norse, plied rivers and seas, ferrying goods, wealth, and cultural influences across thousands of miles. Far from being mere pillagers, many Vikings made their fortunes on trade, weaving an economic web that profoundly shaped medieval Europe. You meet a trader named Eric, whose weather-beaten face tells stories of 1,000 voyages. His hands are strong but deft as he unwraps goods from oilskin cloths. Walrus ivory carved into delicate combs and amulets, lustrous furs from Arctic foxes, and tiny silver ingots hammered into shape. These luxury items were prized in distant lands, symbols of status and refinement that carried the exotic mystique of the far north. Eirik explains that Viking trade was as much about relationships as it was about goods. Negotiations could be intense affairs requiring not only sharp minds, but also a well-crafted reputation for honesty. Trust was currency. Without it, you might be left stranded with unsellable goods. In fact, the word thing used to describe Viking assemblies originally meant a gathering, but also functioned as a marketplace and judicial body where disputes, including trade disputes, were settled. You were invited aboard a replica Nar. Its hull is broad and deep, perfect for carrying heavy cargo across rough seas. The deck smells of salt and tar, a tangible reminder of long voyages braving storms and ice. Unlike the sleek, shallow draft longships used for raids, Nars prioritize storage capacity and seaworthiness, enabling Viking merchants to transport goods over months-long journeys. Their sails, often dyed red or blue, flapped softly in the morning breeze, hinting at the hundreds of miles traveled before arriving here. A quirky detail: Viking traders used tally sticks, pieces of wood, carved with notches to keep track of debts and transactions, an early form of accounting that helped merchants manage complex deals across different languages and currencies. It's a surprisingly practical solution in a world where coins might be rare or valued differently depending on where you were. Eric recounts some of his more exotic trade routes. There was the trip down the Volga River through dense forests and across hostile lands to the Khazar kingdom, a wealthy and multicultural hub where silver coins from the Abbasid Caliphate and Byzantine gold circulated freely. Then there was the journey westward to the British Isles, where Viking traders mingled with Anglo-Saxons and Celts, exchanging goods and sometimes forging political alliances. One fascinating scholarly debate surrounds the degree to which Vikings assimilated into these foreign cultures. Historians argue whether Vikings abroad primarily maintained their own identity or gradually blended with local peoples adopting languages, customs, and religions. The truth likely varies, revealing a mosaic rather than a simple narrative. You watch a skilled merchant weigh out silver coins and barter finely wrought jewelry for salt, a precious preservative essential for food storage. Salt was so valuable that some Viking communities controlled salt works, turning this white mineral into a form of currency. Nearby, a market woman sells glass beads imported from the Frankish kingdoms. These beads were more than just pretty trinkets. They signaled status identity and sometimes even religious belief. The Vikings' fascination with shiny things is well documented, but here it's clear that trade wasn't just economic, it was deeply cultural. You spend time observing the hordes of coins unearthed in recent archaeological digs collections, often buried for safekeeping or hidden during times of conflict. These hoards contain coins from a bewildering array of places: Arabic dirhams, Byzantine solida, and even Anglo-Saxon pennies. They speak to the Vikings' reach and the complexity of their trading economy. Another quirky fact emerges. Some Viking merchants use specially designed scales and weights calibrated to different standards to ensure fair trade with diverse partners. This reflects a high level of commercial sophistication, often underestimated by popular imagination. As afternoon turns to evening, the marketplace quiets, but the hum of commerce lingers in the air. Traders pack their goods carefully, preparing for long journeys by sea or river. You feel the weight of countless stories embedded in these goods, the hopes, risks, and dreams of Vikings who navigated dangerous waters, cultural divides, and shifting political landscapes. On your way back to the village center, you pass a wooden carving of Odin, his one eye watching over travelers and merchants alike. The god of wisdom and cunning, he was often invoked by those venturing into the unknown, whether on the sea or in the marketplace. You settle into your bed as night falls to the sounds of distant waves mingling with the crackling fire outside. The world of Viking trade, a blend of daring adventure, shrewd negotiation, and cultural exchange, echoes softly in your mind. It's a reminder that beneath the myth of marauding barbarians lies a complex society connected by the flow of goods and ideas. As you drift off, you imagine the sails of a Nar billowing against a starry sky, carrying not just furs and silver, but stories and dreams across the endless sea. You wake to the soft glow of dawn brushing against the timbered walls of the longhouse. Today you delve into the spiritual heart of Viking life, their beliefs, rituals, and the gods who shaped their world. Far from the bloodthirsty caricatures often portrayed, Viking spirituality was a rich, nuanced system full of mystery, awe, and complex symbolism. You step into a small sacred grove just beyond the village where ancient trees arch overhead and moss cushions the forest floor. The air feels thick with reverence, the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with faint smoke from a ritual fire. This place is set apart, a liminal zone between the human and divine. Your guide, a wise elder named Hilda, explains that Vikings worshipped a pantheon of gods, each representing different aspects of life and nature. Odin, the all-seeing, one-eyed god of wisdom and war, embodies knowledge gained through sacrifice. Thor, the thunder god, stands as protector of humanity, wielding his mighty hammer to defend against chaos. Freya, goddess of love, fertility, and magic, holds a powerful place in the hearts of many. A well-known fact anchors your experience. Viking religion was polytheistic with numerous gods, goddesses, and spirits influencing daily life, fertility, war, and the natural world. But beyond deities, Vikings believed in an intricate spiritual ecosystem, including land spirits called landvetter, ancestor spirits, and mysterious beings like the Fylgir guardian spirits often linked to individual fate. You watch as Hilda prepares offerings, milk, honey, and carefully baked flatbread, placing them on a carved wooden altar beneath an ancient oak. These offerings honor the gods and spirits, seeking their favor for good harvests, safe voyages, or healing. Rituals like these were integral to maintaining harmony between the human and supernatural realms. Here's a quirky insight. Some Vikings wore small amulets shaped like Thor's hammer. Mjolnir not just as religious symbols, but as protective charms, believed to ward off evil spirits and bad luck. These pendants have been found in countless archaeological sites worn by both men and women, young and old. The sagas recount elaborate feasts held in honor of the gods' blots, where communities gathered to sacrifice animals and share food and drink. These events reinforced social bonds and spiritual commitment. Yet historians still debate the extent to which such rituals were violent sacrifices or more symbolic ceremonies. The truth likely varies by region and period. You notice a runestone nearby, its carved inscriptions faded but still powerful. Runestones often commemorated the dead, celebrated victories, or invoked divine protection. They provide valuable clues about Viking beliefs, names of gods worshipped, and the values held dear. Hilda tells you about the belief in an afterlife. Vikings imagined multiple realms beyond death. The brave might enter Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where fallen warriors feast until Ragnarok, the end of the world. Others journeyed to Hel, a shadowy realm ruled by a goddess of the same name. These afterlife beliefs shaped how Vikings approached death, honor, and remembrance. A fascinating scholarly debate lingers. To what extent did Viking pagan beliefs coexist with early Christian influences during the gradual conversion period? Archaeological finds reveal overlapping symbols and practices, suggesting a complex, often fluid spiritual landscape. You observe a small group of children learning traditional songs and prayers passed orally through generations. Oral transmission was essential in a culture without widespread written language, weaving together history, myth, and morality in one. Later, Hilda performs a quiet ritual of divination, casting bones and interpreting patterns, a practice thought to glimpse the future or understand the will of the gods. Such magic and prophecy were common, blending spirituality with practical decision-making. You feel the weight of ancient wisdom in this sacred place, the Vikings' deep connection to nature, their gods, and the unseen world that shaped every aspect of life. It's a world far more tender and profound than the sword-wielding image often imagined. As twilight descends, you step back to the village, the stars emerging like scattered runes in the sky. The gentle hum of fire and whispered prayers follow you, weaving a soft, enduring thread of spirituality through the Viking world. You curl up by the hearth, the warmth and flickering shadows comforting your thoughts. The gods and spirits of old seem close, watching over you in silence as you drift towards sleep, wrapped in their ancient embrace. You wake with the faint chill of dawn slipping under your blankets. The distant caw of ravens greeting the new day. Today, you immerse yourself in the quieter, steadier rhythm of Viking domestic life, the everyday world where children played, women wove men, hammered, and families gathered. Beyond the epic tales of battles and voyages, the Viking household was a world rich with routine care and subtle complexity. Stepping out, you find the village already alive with activity. The smell of wood smoke mingles with freshly baked bread, while the low murmur of conversations and the clatter of tools blend into a gentle hum. This is the heart of Viking life. The longhouse not just a shelter, but a social hub, where kinship, work, and tradition entwined. To anchor you, the Viking Longhouse was a multifunctional space home workshop meeting place, housing families and sometimes livestock under one roof. These structures, built from timber and turf, varied in size but were typically long and narrow, their central hearth the source of warmth and light. You approach the longhouse of a farmer named Sigurd and his wife Astrid. Inside, smoke coils upward from the central fire pit, the air rich with the scent of burning birch and roasted meat. The wooden walls are adorned with woven tapestries, carved wooden utensils, and simple but sturdy furniture. Despite its rustic appearance, the space is warm, cozy, and organized with care. Astrid shows you the loom where she weaves cloth, her fingers nimble as they shuttle threads back and forth. Textile production was a central household task, demanding skill and patience. Vikings valued brightly colored, finely woven wool and linen, often dyed with natural pigments from plants and minerals. You sit nearby watching children play with carved wooden toys, tiny boats, animals, and simple dolls. Childhood in Viking society was both a time of learning and play with children, quickly introduced to the skills and stories that would define their lives. Play was not mere distraction, but practice for adult roles. A noteworthy fact, Viking women held considerable authority within the household, managing resources, overseeing food preparation, and sometimes even land and business affairs. While Viking society was patriarchal, archaeological evidence and sagas highlight women's roles as powerful agents within family and community. Astrid prepares a simple meal porridge mixed with berries, fresh goat cheese, and hearty rye bread. Food was often seasonal and local, relying on farming, fishing, and gathering. Meals were communal and often accompanied by storytelling songs or practical discussions. You learn about the domestic crafts beyond weaving, blacksmithing, woodworking, and leatherworking were essential. Many families produced their own tools, clothing, and household items, blending necessity with artistry. A quirky insight. Viking homes sometimes had special places for storing amulets and charms, reflecting a blend of daily life with spiritual protection. These small objects offer a glimpse into the intersection of belief and the mundane. You watch Sigurd repair a plowshare, his hammer ringing sharply in the morning air. Metalworking was a respected craft vital for farming tools, weapons, and trade goods. The ability to maintain and create these items underpinned survival and prosperity. Children gather near the fire as Sigurd begins to tell a tale of the gods, a mix of myth and moral lessons. Oral storytelling was the primary means of education, preserving history, law, and cultural identity. The sagas preserved centuries later grew from these hearthside narratives. Here's a point of scholarly discussion. Historians debate how literacy and rune writing fit into everyday Viking life. Was it widespread or limited to elites and specialists? Runic inscriptions survive on monuments, tools, and personal items, but the extent of literacy remains uncertain. You observe the seasonal rhythms governing domestic tasks. Spring and summer brought planting and harvesting, while autumn focused on preserving food for winter. Winter itself was a time for repairs, crafts, and communal gatherings, vital for social cohesion. Food preservation methods included smoking, salting, and drying techniques passed down and perfected through generations. You marvel at how these ancient practices mirror modern artisanal approaches. Astrid and Sigurd speak warmly of family bonds, emphasizing hospitality, mutual support, and respect. Viking households often extended beyond nuclear families, including servants, apprentices, or even freed slaves, creating complex social units. You notice small personal items, beads, hairpins, and simple jewelry hinting at daily expressions of identity and status. Vikings cared deeply about appearance and social signaling, balancing practicality with display. A curious fact surfaces. Some Viking homes included small gardens with herbs and vegetables, showing an intimate relationship with cultivated land and the natural world. Gardening supplemented the diet and provided materials for medicine and rituals. As dusk falls, the longhouse glows softly with firelight voices mingling in song and laughter. The day's labors yield to rest, reflection, and the comfort of shared stories. You realize that beneath the grand sagas and battles lies this quieter, enduring world of home and hearth. You settle down on a woven mat, the rhythmic crackle of fire soothing you as sleep beckons. The pulse of everyday Viking life with its steady routines and vibrant community wraps around you like a familiar blanket, whispering of resilience, care, and human connection. You wake to the muted light of a northern morning, the chill still lingering in the air, reminding you that the seasons shape every aspect of Viking existence. Today, you immerse yourself in how the Vikings adapted to and respected the cycles of nature, their deep connection to the environment, and how survival depended on reading its rhythms with keen eyes and patient hands. You step outside the longhouse where frost clings to the grass and smoke curls from chimneys. The landscape stretches out, rolling hills, dense forests, and sparkling fjords beyond. This world is both a provider and a harsh taskmaster. You watch as villagers prepare for the day's labor tending to animals, gathering wood, and checking traps set in the forest. The natural world is not simply a backdrop, but a constant presence shaping every decision. One firm historical fact guides you. Vikings lived in a largely agrarian society, relying on farming, animal husbandry, hunting, and fishing activities, dictated by the changing seasons. Their survival depended on knowledge passed down through generations carefully tuned to the local environment. You follow a farmer named Bjorn, who shows you the seasonal calendar that governs his work. Spring means planting barley and oats. Summer is for tending crops and fishing. Autumn is the crucial harvest season, and winter, while quiet on the surface, demands preparation and repair. The Viking year was a dance of labor and rest with festivals marking key moments. A quirky detail emerges. Some Viking communities used calendar sticks, carved wooden staffs with notches to mark days and important seasonal events, a tactile way to track time before widespread written records. These tools offer a glimpse into the pragmatic yet symbolic ways Vikings engaged with time and nature. Bjorn points out the importance of the solstices and equinoxes. The winter solstice, for example, was a time of celebration and hope, marking the return of longer days. Midwinter feasts brought the community together, blending practical preparation with spiritual renewal. You explore the varied landscape, dense pine forests, rocky outcrops, and fertile fields. Each ecosystem provided different resources: timber for building, game for hunting, wild berries, and herbs for food and medicine. Vikings were adept at foraging, using local plants for everything from dyeing cloth to treating ailments. A fascinating scholarly debate surrounds how Vikings managed the environment. Were they sustainable stewards of the land or agents of deforestation and ecological change? Archaeological evidence shows both careful management and significant landscape alteration reflecting diverse practices and pressures. You accompany a fishing party launching a small boat into a fjord, nets and lines ready. Fish such as cod, herring, and salmon were dietary staples vital for protein, especially in winter months. Fishing techniques varied from spears to large nets and required intimate knowledge of tides and fish behavior. Another quirky insight, Viking fishermen sometimes used fish traps called weirs, wooden enclosures, built in rivers or tidal areas that channeled fish into holding pens. These ingenious constructions reflect a blend of patience and engineering skill. You visit a small herb garden tended by the village healer, an older woman named Solveig. She gathers leaves and roots yarrow for wounds, elderberries for colds, and angelica for digestion. Medicine blended practical observation with magical elements, reflecting the Vikings' holistic view of health. Seasonal festivals punctuate the year, combining feasting, sacrifice, and storytelling. These celebrations reinforced social bonds and marked transitions in the natural cycle. The harvest festival was especially important, a moment to give thanks and prepare for winter's scarcity. You observe animal husbandry, the care of cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens, each playing a crucial role. Animals provided meat, milk, wool, and labor, but also symbolized wealth and status. The value placed on livestock sometimes rivaled that of precious metals. A curious fact. Viking law codes often included detailed regulations about property inheritance and livestock management, highlighting the economic and social importance of animals. These laws helped maintain order in complex rural communities. You explore the challenges posed by the environment, harsh winters, unpredictable weather, and limited daylight. These hardships demanded resilience and adaptability, shaping not only daily life, but also social structures and cultural values. Vikings developed architectural adaptations, steep roofs to shed snow turf walls for insulation, and small windows to conserve heat. These features reveal a sophisticated response to climate. The relationship with nature also extended into mythology. Many gods and spirits were linked to natural phenomena, the thunderous power of Thor, the fertility of Freyr, and the mysterious wildness of forest spirits. This spiritual connection reinforced respect for the land and its rhythms. As evening falls, you join villagers around the fire, sharing stories that weave together human experience with the natural world. You feel the pulse of life tied tightly to earth, sky, and sea, a fragile but enduring bond. You settle down the sounds of the night forest, whispering softly outside the steady beat of your own breath, syncing with the timeless cycles you've witnessed. The Vikings' world is not only of warriors and explorers, but also of caretakers, intimately attuned to the land that shaped them. You wake to the soft murmur of a river flowing nearby, its gentle babble threading through the morning air like a lullaby. The chill of dawn clings to your skin, but the promise of the day stirs your senses. Today, your journey leads you deeper into the Viking world's relationship with water, not just as a route for raids and exploration, but as the very lifeblood of daily existence, trade, and cultural identity. The seas, rivers, and lakes weren't mere backdrops, but dynamic highways and sources of sustenance shaping everything from economy to mythology. The smell of salt mingles with fresh pine as you step onto the pebbled shore of a fjord. Longships rest quietly, their carved prows like the heads of sleeping dragons. Their sleek wooden hulls gleam with the soft morning light, a testament to craftsmanship and the mastery of the waves. The water laps gently, reflecting a sky streaked with early clouds and birds calling overhead. You take a breath of the crisp air, feeling the chill of the sea mixed with the earthiness of the surrounding forest. It's hard to imagine that these same waters were once fierce battlegrounds, routes of conquest, and arteries of commerce that connected Viking communities to the wider world. But today, you look beyond the legends of pillaging and instead see the water's everyday role in shaping Viking lives. A solid historical fact anchors your experience. Vikings were expert seafarers who built and navigated ships that were both swift and sturdy, allowing them to travel vast distances across the North Atlantic and inland waterways. Their skill on the water wasn't just about raids, it was about survival, trade communication, and exploration. You join a group of villagers preparing a fishing expedition. The boats are smaller than the famed longships, open and sturdy, designed for nearshore fishing rather than long voyages. Nets and lines are checked and mended with care knots tied with practiced fingers. The ritual of setting out to fish is both practical and spiritual offering thanks to the gods for the bounty they hope to catch. A quirky insight bubbles up. Vikings sometimes used a sunstone, a type of crystal believed to help locate the sun's position on cloudy days, aiding navigation at sea. While the precise identity and use of the sunstone remain debated, this reflects the Vikings' ingenuity and reliance on natural tools. As the boat slips quietly into the water, you feel the gentle rocking and hear the splash of oars. The fjord opens before you, a ribbon of calm water bordered by steep hills and forest. This sheltered waterway contrasts with the tempestuous open sea, but is just as vital, providing fish transportation and connection. You watch seasoned fishermen cast nets into the water, waiting patiently as the ripples settle. Fish like cod, herring, and salmon are staples in the Viking diet, supplying essential protein, especially during long winters. The catch will be smoked, dried, or salted methods that preserve food and allow it to be stored or traded. You notice how intimately the fishermen understand tides, moon phases, and fish behavior knowledge passed down through generations. Their eyes scan the water and sky attuned to subtle signs that predict success or hardship. Beyond fishing, water was a crucial highway. You glimpse long ships pushing off from the shore, their sails unfurling to catch the breeze. These vessels were marvels of naval architecture built for speed and versatility. The clinker-built hulls overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets gave them strength and flexibility, enabling daring voyages across the North Sea, the Baltic, and even the Atlantic. You reflect on one of the most famous facts. Viking longships could navigate both open oceans and shallow rivers, allowing raids and trade deep into continental Europe and beyond. This dual capability made Vikings formidable and adaptable, capable of sudden attacks or peaceful diplomacy. The boat's figureheads, often dragon or serpent motifs, served both to inspire fear and to invoke protection. The artistry involved in carving these ornate prow decorations reveals the importance of watercraft not only as tools but as cultural symbols. The water was also a boundary between worlds. Many myths speak of crossing rivers or seas as journeys to other realms, Valhalla, Hell, or mysterious lands beyond the horizon. Water symbolized both life and death, passage and transformation. You listen as an elder recounts tales of sea gods and spirits, Aegir, the lord of the ocean, and his wife, Ran, whose net could trap unwary sailors. These stories echo through generations, blending respect for the sea's power with hope for its generosity. A lively debate among scholars lingers. To what extent did Viking voyages shape early medieval global connections? Were Vikings isolated raiders or integral players in international trade networks? Archaeological finds of exotic goods, silk, silver coins, spices suggest a surprising openness and reach. Trade flourished along waterways. Markets sprung up at river mouths and coastal towns where goods from Scandinavia mixed with items from the Islamic world, Byzantium, and Western Europe. Amber furs iron and slaves were exchanged for fine textiles, glassware, and precious metals. You visit a bustling trading settlement by a river estuary where merchants haggle over prices and goods change hands in a medley of languages. The sounds are a mixture of Norse, Slavonic, Arabic, and Latin, underscoring the Vikings' role as cultural intermediaries. Another curious detail: some Viking trade centers evolved into proto-urban sites with permanent markets, specialized craftspeople, and even rudimentary governance. These early towns paved the way for the medieval cities that would later dominate Europe. You observe a boat builder at work near the water's edge fashioning a new ship from oak timber. His workshop is filled with tools, adzes, knives, and chisels, each carefully maintained. The craft of shipbuilding was a revered skill demanding knowledge of wood hydrodynamics and seamanship. You're reminded that these waters were not always peaceful. Skirmishes between rival clans or defending against foreign threats were common. The sound of horns and shields clashing might suddenly replace the calm. Yet the sea's bounty also fostered cooperation and exchange. A quirky and lesser-known fact: Vikings sometimes buried their dead in boats either whole or symbolic, reflecting their belief in sea voyages in the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered such burial ships sometimes adorned with grave goods and weapons, illuminating the spiritual significance of water travel. As the sun climbs higher, you take a moment to watch the horizon where sea meets sky. The same expanse that carried Vikings to distant lands also brought home the fruits of their journeys: new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. You join a group preparing a ritual by the shore offering gifts to the water spirits, a tradition meant to ensure safe passage and plentiful catches. Bowls of mead, freshly baked bread, and small carved figures are laid gently on the waves, a gesture of respect and supplication. The ceremony blends the practical with the spiritual, highlighting the Vikings' deep reverence for the forces that governed their lives. It's not just survival, it's an ongoing relationship with the living world around them. As evening falls, the fjord's surface mirrors the fiery hues of sunset. You sit by the water's edge, the quiet lapping of waves lulling you into a contemplative mood. The Vikings' mastery of water wasn't just about ships or navigation, it was about understanding respect and balance. You reflect on how water connects past and present, nature and culture, the known and the mysterious. The Vikings' world was one where every splash, every ripple carried stories of adventure, danger, and hope. Curling up beneath a thick woolen blanket, the sound of distant waves mingles with the crackling fire. The water's gentle rhythm syncs with your breath, and you drift toward sleep carried on the ancient currents that once bore warriors, traders, and dreamers across endless horizons. You wake slowly to the faint scent of wood smoke curling through the crisp morning air, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp soil and mossy stones. Today, your journey dives into the heart of Viking domestic life, the rhythms, routines, and relationships within their homes and communities. It's a world far from the pillaging sagas and battles you might expect, instead focused on family ties, gender roles, daily chores, and the social fabric that held villages together. Stepping into a bustling village courtyard, you notice the longhouses clustered close, their turf walls and thatched roofs blending into the landscape. Smoke billows gently from central hearths, promising warmth and cooked meals. The longhouse was the center of domestic life, a communal space where work, rest, and socializing happened side by side. A well-known fact anchors your understanding: Viking households were typically large, often multi-generational, with extended family living together under one roof. This arrangement supported labor sharing, child rearing, and mutual defense, creating tight knit communities. Inside one longhouse, you meet a family preparing for the day. The headman sharpens tools and checks the store of food while his wife tends the hearth, stirring a pot of porridge. Children play with simple wooden toys nearby, their laughter echoing softly. You note the gendered division of labor. Men often handled farming, hunting, and construction, while women managed household tasks, textile production, and food preparation. But this wasn't rigid. Women could also wield considerable influence in managing resources and decisions. A quirky detail emerges. Viking women sometimes carried keys to the household storage chests as a symbol of their authority over the domestic realm. This physical symbol reflects the power women held within their own sphere, a counterbalance to the more public roles of men. You watch as the family prepares linen and wool for spinning and weaving, essential crafts that produced clothing, sails, and blankets. These skills required patience and expertise passed down through generations of women. The kitchen smells of fresh herbs, roasted meat, and baking bread. You notice a small herb garden near the house where plants like dill, thyme, and mint grow, used both for flavor and medicine. Food wasn't just fuel, it was a link to tradition and health. A lively scholarly debate colors the picture. Historians still argue over the extent of women's legal rights and social status. Were they truly empowered partners or constrained by patriarchal norms? Evidence of women as landowners and legal actors suggests complexity beyond simple stereotypes. You meet a village elder who recounts family stories, illustrating how disputes were settled within the household and community. The system balanced justice with maintaining harmony, often involving mediation and compensation rather than violence. Children's upbringing emphasized practical skills, running errands, helping in fields, learning craft work, as well as storytelling and oral history. Education wasn't formal but deeply rooted in everyday experience and cultural transmission. A fascinating fact. Viking children sometimes practiced with toy weapons, preparing for roles as warriors or hunters, while also engaging in imaginative play. This blend of play and preparation shaped identity and community roles. Marriage customs varied but often involved alliances between families, with bride prices or dowries exchanged to formalize bonds. These unions strengthened social networks and ensured economic stability. You explore how hospitality was central to Viking society. Visitors were welcomed, offered food and shelter, and protected. This ethic fostered connections beyond the immediate family, creating networks of loyalty and obligation. The village forge rings with the sound of hammering metal. Blacksmiths crafted tools, weapons, and household items essential for daily life. Their work was highly respected, blending practical skill with artistry. You note the importance of communal work, building barns, clearing fields, or repairing boats, activities that required cooperation and reinforced social cohesion. These tasks often culminated in feasts and celebrations, rewarding collective effort. A quirky insight. Some Viking homes featured hidden compartments or secret spaces, perhaps for storing valuables or protecting families during raids. Archaeologists occasionally uncover these mysterious features, sparking curiosity about everyday fears and strategies. You watch the sun begin to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village. The day winds down with storytelling music and quiet moments around the fire. Songs and tales preserve history, entertain, and teach morals. The Longhouse feels warm and alive, a place where the Viking world's human side comes into sharp focus, its joys, struggles, and enduring bonds. Far from the mythic battles, it's a place of care, labor, and belonging. As darkness settles, you lie beneath a woolen blanket, soothed by the crackling fire and soft voices. The rhythms of home, the smells, sounds, and faces lull you gently toward sleep, the pulse of domestic life beating strong and steady. You wake to the faint but persistent hum of morning activity, a chorus of roosters crowing and the clatter of wooden wheels on dirt paths. Today, you step beyond the longhouses and village life to explore the Viking economy, how these northern people produced traded and consumed goods in a world where currency was fluid and barter often reigned. You soon realized that their economy was surprisingly sophisticated, fueled by a mix of agriculture, craft trade, and yes, the infamous raiding. But that's just a part of the story. The air is brisk as you walk into a busy marketplace nestled between timber buildings with steep roofs. Merchants display furs, iron tools, pots of honey, and woven cloth. The sounds of negotiation fill the space, sharp voices, laughter, and the occasional clink of silver coins. These markets were hubs of exchange connecting Vikings to goods and ideas from across Europe, Asia, and even the Middle East. A solid historical fact guides your understanding Vikings used various forms of currency, including silver coins, bullion, and barter goods, reflecting a complex and evolving economic system. Unlike a strictly coin-based economy, their trade often involved weighing silver or exchanging commodities, demonstrating flexibility in transactions. You approach a merchant weighing a pile of hacked silver-cut pieces of silver used as currency. It's a reminder that money wasn't always neatly minted coins, but could be raw metal measured for value. This system suited a society that prized precious metals, but operated in a largely non-monetized rural environment. You overhear a lively debate among traders about the origin of some exotic goods, fine silk, from the East intricate glassware, from the Mediterranean spices, from distant lands. These objects reveal Viking trade routes that spanned vast distances, connecting northern Europe with the Islamic Caliphates, Byzantium, and beyond. A quirky tidbit surfaces, Vikings often repurposed Roman and Byzantine coins as jewelry or decoration, sometimes cutting them into shapes or embedding them in brooches. This creative recycling blended practicality with artistry and prestige. You notice craftspeople demonstrating their skills, nearby potters, shaping clay weavers, turning threads on looms, blacksmiths hammering glowing iron. These artisans produced both everyday items and luxury goods essential for local use and trade. Agriculture formed the backbone of the Viking economy. Fields of barley, rye, and oats stretched beyond the village, with farmers tending livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats. Animal products like milk, cheese, wool, and leather were vital commodities. A less-known fact, Viking farmers practiced crop rotation and used manure to enrich soil, showing an early understanding of sustainable farming techniques. This knowledge helped communities endure harsh climates and variable harvests. You pass by a group of women spinning wool and flax into yarn, a task as necessary as it is skilled. Textiles were crucial not only for clothing, but also for sales tents and trade goods. The quality and patterns of fabric could indicate social status and regional identity. Trade wasn't limited to goods, it extended to ideas and technology. You see the influence of foreign metalworking techniques, ship designs, and even coin minting, spreading through Viking territories, showing a dynamic exchange network. Another scholarly debate surfaces. To what extent were Viking raids motivated by economic necessity versus opportunistic plunder or political ambition? While raiding was lucrative, many argue it was part of a broader economic strategy involving settlement and trade. You observe a scene of barter. A farmer exchanges a sack of grain for iron tools, while the trader offers furs in return for salt and dried fish. Salt, in particular, was a precious commodity for preserving food, especially over long winters. You learn that some Viking towns evolved into early commercial centers with permanent markets, specialized craftspeople, and administrative structures. Places like Hedeby and Burka became vibrant trading hubs connecting the north to the wider medieval world. A quirky but fascinating note, Viking trade routes even reached the Volga River, linking them to Slavic tribes and Muslim merchants, revealing an astonishing breadth of interaction. Archaeological finds of Arabic coins and luxury items confirm these far-reaching connections. You explore how Viking society balanced trade and warfare with merchants, sometimes doubling as raiders and warriors participating in commerce. This blurred line challenges simplistic views of Vikings as purely violent marauders. Food production and consumption also played a role in social life. Feasts were occasions to display wealth, strengthen alliances, and celebrate religious festivals. The sharing of food and drink reinforced communal bonds and hierarchies. You glimpse a feast being prepared, smoked meats, hearty stews, flatbreads, and barrels of ale. Drinking horns and wooden cups clink in anticipation. The communal aspect of eating and drinking was vital to Viking social fabric. A lesser-known fact, mead, a fermented honey drink, was highly prized and often associated with ritual and celebration, adding a sweet note to Viking conviviality. Mead's role in mythology and ceremony underscores its cultural significance. As the day wanes, you reflect on the intricate economic web that sustained Viking life, interweaving farming, craft trade, and occasional raiding. This network was resilient and adaptable, reflecting the Vikings' resourcefulness. The marketplace quiets as merchants pack up and villagers return home. Lanterns begin to glow softly in the twilight, casting a warm light on familiar faces. You feel the pulse of an economy that was as much about relationships and trust as it was about silver and goods. You settle down for the night beneath a blanket woven from local wool, the sounds of the village fading into a comfortable silence. The complexity of Viking economic life lingers in your thoughts, a reminder that beneath the myths lie the rhythms of ordinary people navigating a vast and changing world. You wake to a chill in the air, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint metallic tang of the sea breeze. Today your journey takes you onto Viking ships, not just the fearsome war vessels of legend, but the humble everyday boats that ferried goods, people, and ideas across the labyrinth of fjords, rivers, and seas. You're about to discover the lifeblood of Viking mobility, their maritime technology, and its astonishing versatility. The sun glints off polished wooden planks as you step aboard a sleek longship, its dragon-headed prow slicing the water with elegant power. This ship isn't just a vehicle, it's a marvel of engineering designed for speed, flexibility, and endurance. The Vikings were masters of the sea, navigating vast distances and complex coastlines with a skill that often outpaced their rivals. A well-established historical fact anchors this understanding. The Viking longship was clinker-built, meaning its planks overlapped, creating a flexible and sturdy hull ideal for both ocean voyages and shallow river travel. This design allowed Vikings to strike deep into foreign lands, whether by sea or river, surprising enemies who thought themselves safe inland. You run your hand along the smooth, weathered wood, feeling the careful craftsmanship that made these ships swift and resilient. The oars, evenly spaced along the sides, hint at the coordinated teamwork required to propel the vessel, while a single square sail hangs ready to catch the wind. An intriguing detail catches your attention. Viking ships often had removable rudders and could be carried overland between waterways, allowing these intrepid sailors to bypass natural obstacles. This portage capability gave Vikings a strategic edge, opening routes that seemed inaccessible to others. You watch as the crew prepares to set sail. Some tie ropes, others adjust the sail, and the helmsman scans the horizon. Their knowledge of wind patterns, tides, and celestial navigation was extensive, though historians still debate the exact methods used. Did they rely solely on sun and stars, or did they use primitive compasses, or even sunstones to locate the sun on cloudy days? The ship slips smoothly away from the shore, cutting through the water with practiced ease. You feel the sea spray on your face and hear the rhythmic splash of oars in unison. The open sea is both a highway and a challenge, with sudden storms, shifting currents, and the ever-present risk of enemy encounter. You reflect on the dual purpose of Viking ships. They were vessels of exploration and trade, but also of war and raiding. This duality shaped Viking society profoundly. Your hosts are both merchants and warriors, their identities woven with maritime threads. A quirky fact emerges. Viking ships were often buried with their owners, filled with grave goods to accompany them in the afterlife, a practice reflecting their deep spiritual and cultural connection to these vessels. The famous Oseberg ship burial, richly adorned and exquisitely preserved, offers a poignant glimpse into this tradition. You learn that shipbuilding was a highly specialized craft, often passed down through families or guilds. Each ship was tailored to its intended purpose, whether a swift raiding vessel, a cargo carrier, or a ceremonial barge. The scale of Viking voyages astonishes you. Beyond the familiar routes to England and France, Vikings reached Iceland, Greenland, and even the mysterious lands of Vinland, modern Newfoundland. These expeditions demanded courage, planning, and adaptability. A lively scholarly debate colors the scene. Historians still argue about the precise timing and motivations for these westward explorations. Were they driven by overpopulation, political exile, trade ambitions, or pure adventure? Whatever the reason, these journeys expanded the known world dramatically. You notice how Viking maritime life influenced social structures. Ship crews were often bonded by loyalty, shared risk, and a sense of brotherhood, forging ties stronger than many land-based communities. The ship was a microcosm of Viking society, demanding cooperation and discipline. On board, you sample preserved foods, dried fish, hard bread, and ale staples that sustained crews on long voyages. The limited diet required ingenuity and careful rationing, underscoring the harsh realities behind the romanticized image of Viking seafarers. As the ship glides beneath a sky painted with stars, you reflect on the risks and rewards of Viking maritime life. The sea was a source of wealth, connection, and danger, a vast, unpredictable partner in their story. Finally, the ship docks at a distant settlement where trade goods are unloaded and news exchanged. Here, Vikings meet other cultures, adopting and adapting new customs and technologies. The sea routes were arteries of cultural as well as economic exchange. You lie down on a rough blanket in a small cabin, the creaking of the ship and the gentle rocking lulling you toward sleep. The scent of salt and pine fills the air, a reminder that for Vikings the sea was home, highway, and destiny. You awaken to the muffled sound of voices and footsteps, the faint clatter of tools, and the smell of freshly turned earth. Today, you venture beyond the water's edge to the Viking countryside to see how they carved farms, fields, and settlements out of challenging northern landscapes. This exploration reveals the Vikings' intimate relationship with the land, how they shaped it, adapted to it, and sometimes struggled against it in ways far more ordinary than the epic raids you might expect. The air is crisp with morning dew as you step into a broad valley where green fields stretch toward distant hills. Small clusters of turf-covered houses dot the landscape, smoke curling from stone chimneys. This is Viking farmland, open, practical, and carefully managed. You learn a well-established fact. The Vikings practiced mixed farming, cultivating grains like barley, rye, and oats while also raising livestock, including cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. This combination helped buffer against crop failures and provided varied food and materials. Walking through a field, you see traces of old cultivation techniques, furrows, drainage ditches, and soil enrichment. Vikings used manure and crop rotation, showing an early understanding of sustainable farming practices to maintain soil fertility despite harsh weather. A quirky tidbit draws your eye. Archaeologists have found ancient Viking seed packets indicating they carefully selected and stored seeds for planting, a kind of proto-agricultural seed bank. This suggests thoughtful planning and knowledge transmission over generations. You pass a small pond where ducks and geese waddle, a sign that animal husbandry extended beyond the large livestock to poultry. Eggs, feathers, and meat from birds supplemented the diet and economy. The farmhouse itself is a sturdy timber-framed structure with turf walls and a thick thatched roof, insulated against cold winters. Inside, a central hearth dominates, used for cooking, heating, and light. The house is multifunctional, housing people, animals, and storage under one roof. You notice the farmstead's layout is often clustered with outbuildings, smokehouses, tool sheds, and grain stores, reflecting careful resource management. Tools like wooden plows and sickles lie nearby, ready for the day's work. A lively scholarly debate echoes in your mind. Historians still discuss whether Viking farmers had access to iron plows widely or relied mostly on wooden ones, which affected the scale and efficiency of cultivation. The answer varies regionally, reflecting local resources and innovation. You encounter a farmer and his family tending to their land. The work is backbreaking, but rhythmic, planting seeds, tending animals, repairing fences. The social structure here is less about hierarchy and more about cooperation, shared labor, and seasonal cycles. Food preservation techniques are vital. You see racks of drying fish, salted meat barrels, and smokehouses where pork hangs in the air. Preserving surplus food ensured survival through long winters when fresh supplies were scarce. Another fascinating detail emerges. Vikings sometimes used underground pits lined with straw and turf to store root vegetables, a primitive but effective cold storage method. This practical innovation helped extend food availability. You glimpse children playing near the fields, learning farming tasks through imitation and instruction. Their future roles are already shaping here: farmers, herders, artisans. Education is informal but immersive. You wander to the village's communal land meadows and forests used for grazing, wood gathering, and hunting. These shared resources were crucial to the community's resilience, but also a source of potential conflict over rights and usage. A curious fact: some Viking communities had formal laws regulating land use and resource management, documented later in Icelandic sagas and law codes. This early environmental governance reveals a sophisticated approach to balancing individual and collective needs. As the day progresses, seasonal activities shape the rhythm of life: spring planting, summer harvesting, autumn slaughtering, and winter repairs. Each season brought distinct challenges and opportunities, celebrated with festivals and rituals. You observe a harvest festival in full swing with music, dancing, and feasting around a bonfire. These events reinforced social bonds and marked important transitions in the agricultural calendar. A less-known scholarly question surfaces: to what extent did Viking agricultural practices spread through their settlements abroad, influencing local economies and landscapes? Archaeological evidence suggests both adaptation to new environments and cultural continuity. You step back to admire the land both shaped by human hands and wild in places, a living testament to Viking resilience and resourcefulness. It's not the grand saga of conquest, but the enduring story of daily survival and community. As twilight descends, you settle beside a flickering hearth, the comforting warmth a sharp contrast to the chill outside. The quiet hum of the countryside rustling leaves, distant animal calls invites a slow, gentle drift toward rest. You think about the cycle of life here, seeds sown, crops harvested, children growing, stories told. The land with all its demands and gifts is the foundation beneath Viking feet, humble yet heroic in its own right. You wake with a soft, lingering sense of history brushing against your skin like a cool breeze. Today you step into the spiritual world of the Vikings, a realm woven with gods, rituals, myths, and symbols that shaped not only their beliefs but also their everyday lives. This is no dark, bloodthirsty fantasy, but a complex and deeply human system of meaning that connected people to nature, community, and the cosmos. You find yourself standing in a clearing surrounded by towering pines and oaks, where a stone altar sits beneath the dappled sunlight. The air carries the scent of pine resin and smoldering herbs, the faint murmur of whispered prayers and chants. Here, Vikings honored their gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and others, each embodying aspects of the natural and human world. A key historical fact anchors your understanding. Viking religion was polytheistic and animistic, combining worship of a pantheon of gods with reverence for spirits of nature, ancestors, and sacred places. Unlike monotheistic faiths, their beliefs embraced complexity, fluidity, and a sense of mystery. You watch as a priestess carefully prepares offerings, perhaps animal sacrifices, food, or crafted goods laid on the altar to honor the gods and seek their favor. Rituals were essential, marking seasons, life events, and battles, reinforcing social cohesion and cosmic order. An intriguing detail surfaces: Viking ritual sites varied widely from open-air groves and stone circles to elaborate temples like the one at Uppsala, Sweden, described by medieval chroniclers. Archaeologists continue to debate the exact nature and location of many sacred sites, blending myth and material evidence. You notice the intricate symbolism carved into wooden idols and rune stones around the clearing. Runes, the Viking script, were not just letters, but carried magical significance used for divination, protection, and communication with the divine. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. Some Viking graves included charms and amulets shaped like Thor's hammer, Mjolnir believed to protect the wearer from harm and evil spirits. These symbols have endured far beyond Viking times, inspiring modern popular culture. You listen to the chanting, rhythmic and hypnotic, echoing the belief that sound and words held power to influence the unseen world. Poetry, too, was sacred skalds, composed verses that preserved history, praised heroes, and invoked gods. A lively scholarly debate surfaces. Historians still discuss the extent to which Viking religion was codified or varied regionally, with some arguing for a more individualized, localized practice rather than a unified belief system. This fluidity complicates efforts to reconstruct Viking spirituality. You join a small group around a communal fire where stories are shared, tales of Ragnarok, the end of the world, heroic exploits of gods and mortals, lessons about fate, courage, and honor. These myths served as both entertainment and moral guidance. Another fascinating fact: Vikings believed in an afterlife shaped by how one lived, with warriors hoping to reach Valhalla to fight beside Odin, while others envisioned peaceful realms like Helheim. This belief system reflected a nuanced understanding of death and destiny. You observe how religious and social life intertwined feasts after successful hunts, or battles often included ritual toasts and prayers, blending the sacred with the celebratory. The sharing of mead and stories reinforced bonds and transmitted cultural values. A less known detail: some Viking rituals included trance like states induced by chanting, dancing, or even psychoactive plants, hinting at shamanic practices. Such elements reveal a spiritual depth, often overshadowed by popular images of Vikings as mere warriors. You watch a ritual seer interpret the runes, offering guidance for decisions about voyages, alliances, or disputes. This role held significant influence, blending religious authority with political power. You consider the Viking worldview as a tapestry of interconnections, humans, gods, nature, and fate all intertwined in a delicate balance. This perspective shaped everything from daily routines to grand decisions, anchoring a sense of place and purpose. As evening falls, the sky a canvas of stars, you feel the presence of the sacred in the quiet rustle of leaves, the crackle of fire, and the whispered prayers carried on the wind. The Viking spirit lives not only in battles and ships, but in the reverent pauses between the moments of awe and mystery. You settle beneath a canopy of stars, the distant sound of a lone horn blending with the night's hush. The spiritual world, complex and enduring, invites you to rest, to dream, and to remember the many layers that made Viking life so rich and human. You wake slowly, the soft light of dawn filtering through a woven curtain of reeds and rough linen. The quiet of the early morning feels like a gentle invitation to reflect on everything you've seen, heard, and felt during your journey through Viking life. It's time to drift with the story toward its calm conclusion, easing into the rhythm of rest and the gentle closing of this long voyage through history. You sit outside a modest Viking longhouse, the earth still damp from last night's rain. The scent of moss and wood smoke drifts lightly on the air, mixing with the faint tang of salted fish drying nearby. Around you, the world seems to breathe slowly, birds beginning their tentative songs, a breeze rustling through the leaves, the distant murmur of a stream. Tonight you won't be remembering battles or bold raids, treasures, or distant voyages. Instead, you hold the quiet moments, the shared meals, the steady hands weaving cloth, the lullabies sung to restless children, the fireside stories and whispered prayers. These are the threads that truly wove Viking society together beneath the legends and myths. You think back to the longships slicing through misty fjords, their dragon heads glinting under the sun, to the farmland rich with barley and oats where sweat and soil met in patient toil, to the bustling market stalls filled with goods from near and far, amber furs, silver coins, and exotic spices, each telling a story of trade and connection, to the sacred groves and stone altars where gods were honored and mysteries pondered. All of these moments blend together, revealing Vikings not just as fierce warriors, but as deeply complex people, farmers and traders, artisans and seers, dreamers and survivors. Their lives were shaped by the harsh yet beautiful northern world they called home, a place of stark contrast where community courage and creativity thrived. You feel the slow pulse of time stretching out like the endless horizon over a calm sea. The seasons turn, stories evolve, and echoes of the past ripple through the present. The Vikings you met live on not only in history books, but in the languages, landscapes, and cultures they helped shape. As your eyes grow heavy, you notice how the quiet here invites you to let go, to rest, to dream, to float gently on the waves of memory and imagination. You breathe deeply, the cool air filling your lungs, soothing and steadying. There's comfort in knowing that history isn't just about grand events or famous names, but about everyday lives filled with hope, struggle, laughter, and love. The Vikings' story, like yours, is a tapestry woven from countless small moments, each adding color and texture to the whole. You hear the distant call of an owl, the soft rustling of leaves, the faint crackle of a dying fire. The world slows, shadows lengthen, and night wraps around you like a warm cloak. Your mind drifts toward peaceful landscapes, quiet forests, gentle streams, and star-studded skies. Rest now. Let the steady rhythm of your breath carry you through the night. The Vikings have walked beside you, their voices a gentle murmur in the dark. Their journey is complete for tonight, but the stories remain waiting, always waiting for you to return. Good night, friend. Sleep well.